Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of viewers aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this content, hit that subscribe button. It really helps keep these long stories coming. Also, for even more police horror stories, check out my new channel. The link's in the description and pinned comment. I'd love it if you stop by and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. What time is it where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. I remember the exact crackle of dispatch that first night, the way it spat my badge number into the cab before dying in static. It was October, cold enough that your breath hit the windshield in little clouds, but not cold enough to make you think twice about sitting on that seat for another 12 hours. I'd been on nights in Pine Hollow, Nebraska, for almost 3 years by then. Just me and the lonely turnpike that ran 12 miles south of town. A string of farms and silos under that endless Midwestern sky. Nothing ever happened after midnight. Until it did. I was halfway through my first coffee when the call came in. An open line from 1127 Miller Road. That farmhouse had been empty for close to a decade. Abandoned when Old Man Carter died and his kids moved to Lincoln. No phone registered to that address, just one of those old landlines left behind. Dispatch keyed in the report, voice flat. 103, hang-up call, no voice, just line noise. Confirm en route. I punched the overhead lights on and eased out of the station. Tires crunching on gravel, neon sign flickering out. Pine Hollow PD closed until morning. The Charger's headlights carved a narrow path down the black highway, and I felt that familiar knot rise in my gut, the one that says you're about to see something you can't unsee. When I pulled onto Miller Road, the place was cloaked in shadow. No porch light, no moon, just an old oak leaning into the front yard. I creeped up to the sagging door, hand on my holster, torch sweeping corners. The beam landed on broken glass along the threshold. Once big bay windows, now shards lit by the spotlight. I called out, "Pine Hollow, this is Officer Davis. Anyone here?" Voice steady, practiced, no answer. Heart rolled in my chest like a loose stone. I circled to the back, and that's when I saw it. Footprints in the dew, bright white where the grass still held frost. They led from the back door to the edge of the field, then vanished into the dark. No sign of struggle, no trash or footprints crossing back, like someone stepped into that field and just dissolved. I felt that old itch. Something about the prints didn't add up. They were freshly made, but the dew around them was already drying. I eased back up to the porch, flicked my radio. "Dispatch, I'm on site." No visible subjects, footprints leading off on east side. The reply crackled. 10-4, keep me posted. And then, the radio went dead. Just static, the kind that makes every hair on your neck stand on end. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, engine idling, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Finally, I walked back inside, moving room to room. No sign of recent occupation, just the stale air of abandonment. In the bedroom, an old wooden dresser sat open. One drawer yanked out and tossed on the floor, clothes still hanging half-folded. Like someone rifled through it and left in a hurry. I stepped outside and flicked my torch back on the yard, still empty. No footprints returning. No headlights on the horizon. Nothing but that deafening Nebraska silence. I filed the report as a trespassing call and left. On the drive back, I thought about that shattered window glass. Who breaks in, prowls around, then vanishes without a trace? I chalked it up to kids, local kids, messing around. No one in their right mind would camp out, on old Carter's land in the middle of the night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from those fields. 2 weeks later, I got another call. Same script, different town. Marion, Ohio, running car in the church parking lot, engine idling, no one behind the wheel. They sent me the GPS coordinates and I drove my own car, loaned by my cousin in Kansas City, down that cracked county road. When I pulled in, the alabaster chapel sat under a single sodium lamp, its peeling white paint glowing ghostly. The car was a blue sedan. Doors locked, keys dangling from the ignition, engine purring like a trapped beast. I circled it slow, flashlight slicing through the rain, and saw the driver's side window down just a crack. Wet rain droplets on the leather seat. I knocked the glass, waited. Nothing. Then my radio died. Again, that same shriek of static that swallows dispatch. I hit the unlock button, doors opened, and I climbed in. The seatbelt snapped back at me when I sat down as if someone had just undone it. I pulled open the glove box. Empty, except for a single Polaroid of the chapel at dawn. On the back, scrawled in shaky black ink, when. I got back into my cruiser. Radio came alive. 23, status, I replied, cool, hiding the Polaroid behind the dash. All clear, false alarm, vehicle secure. But my voice betrayed me. Dispatch asked twice if I was okay. I said, just an old man's place, nothing but holy water and hymnals. That night, I slept in my uniform. No matter how hard I tried, I could still smell rain on leather. A month after that, I was sent to Monticello, Arkansas, vintage hardware store. Alarm tripped at 2:47 a.m. That place had been closed since Katrina, boarded shut, paint peeling like sunburned skin. I cut through the tape, faded hazard stripes, and kicked the door in. Dust motes floated in the beam of my torch. I cleared the main floor, aisles empty, shelves bare except for a blinking security light. My radio pinged alive for a second, then went dead at the worst possible moment. When I stepped into the storeroom and saw the words etched into the drywall in smear of shotgun grease, hello, my stomach turned. No chalk, no paint. Someone used their bare hands. The room smelled like fresh concrete. I backed out, stepped onto the front porch, and in the muddy ground saw a single boot print, size 9, square toe, leading toward the woods. But that footprint was 4 hours old by the looks of it, crusted mud drying into cracks. Whoever it was, they'd been waiting. By the time I got back to Pine Hollow that November, I'd heard similar stories from near Crawford, Illinois, and Bryson, Nevada. Each called in a different pretext. Car alarms, strange noises, prowlers. But all ended the same. Vanished suspects, dead radios, footprints that didn't align with the timeline. My sergeant told me it was spread-thin departments. Nothing to worry about. Junk calls. But I knew better. I felt the pattern press into my mind like a vice. On my last night before Thanksgiving break, I got one more call, this one from Oak Ridge, Kansas. A stranger wandering outside Lambert's bar, raining hard, no address, no dispatch info. I pulled up under neon letters blinking out, closed for maintenance. I cut the engine guide stud, stepped into the rain. No puddles in the lot. Water seemed to disappear into the tar. I saw a figure under the streetlight, soaked through, suit clinging like a second skin, face hidden in shadow. I shone my beam. The figure didn't flinch, no words. I asked, "You lost?" Only to get that same blank stare. My radio crackled, then nothing. I radioed dispatch. "I've got a party here, no address, no record of invention." They said 10-4. Another deadline. I reached out, but when I flicked the light, he was gone. Just an empty lot, rain drumming on my shoulders. Then, underneath that drumming, I swore I heard my own name hissed by the wind. Davis. Davis. But my ears rang and the drop line of static swallowed it. I stayed until dawn. When the sun finally broke, I drove home, shoulders sore, heart still pounding. I poured a bourbon straight from the bottle and sat on my back porch until sunrise. That was the last time I answered a midnight call in any of those towns. I finished out my shift, turned in my uniform, and walked away. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I'm back under those streetlights, hearing the drip of rain, calling out to an empty road. Because somewhere out there someone is still testing, waiting for the next officer to step into the dark. And maybe they never stop. I'm still piecing it together in my head, replaying that first night over and over. The feel of the wheel under my fingers, the hiss of my own breath, the way the shadows stretched across those fields. I can't stop thinking about the details I missed, the ones that feel like footprints in my memory, leading me back to a place I don't want to return. I remember climbing out of the Charger and feeling the cold seep into my bones before I even touched the porch. It was that wet cold, the kind that slides right through your jacket and sets your teeth to chattering. My boots crunched on gravel that scrabbled underfoot, and I kept my hand resting on the doorframe as I edged inside. The beam from my maglite shook against the walls, painting long, uneven rectangles of white in the darkness. Every creak of floorboard made me flinch. Each room looked exactly the same. Faded wallpaper peeling at the corners, a layer of dust thick enough to leave prints when I tapped the hardwood. There was a dresser in the far bedroom, its drawers hanging open as if abandoned in mid-search. One drawer lay on its face in the hallway, its contents, old flannel shirts, yellowing sheets of paper, spilled across the floor. I knelt to inspect the pages. Grocery lists, a faded postcard, a child's crayon drawing of a tree. Nothing that belonged to anyone in Pine Hollow. Yet the feel of that paper under my gloves stuck with me, like a whisper in the dark. I remember turning my flashlight toward the kitchen and seeing it. A single mug, hairline cracks running through the ceramic, resting on the counter as if someone had paused mid-sip. I flash-lit the rest of the counter. Empty plates, a knife block, all untouched. But that mug, warm. I tested it with a finger along the rim, and the heat seared through my glove. Someone had been here recently, drinking coffee or maybe tea, leaving that cup to cool for just long enough to edge me into belief that it was nothing more than a family left behind. The radio on my belt buzzed, just static, then a faint pop. I stabbed the PTT. Dispatch, this is 103. I got a warm mug in the kitchen. Someone's been here. But only static answered. Dispatch had cut out again. I swept the flashlight back toward the windows, then paused as I noticed the curtain, half drawn to one side. I'd missed it on my way through. I moved closer, raised the beam, and realized the curtain rod had been forced out of its brackets, jarring against the wall in scraped metal. Then the footprints on the porch. They crisscrossed in every direction, fresh mud in the grooves of my tread, but none leading back inside. They stopped at the edge of the woods, just there, on the fringe of those old oaks where the sky is swallowed by limbs. I stood frozen, adrenaline pinning me in place, listening for anything beyond my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Wind caught the broken glass at the threshold and rattled it in time with my pulse. I thought I heard whispers, low, breathy syllables, indistinct but human-sounding. My mouth went dry. I swallowed, pressed my back against the wall, and whispered to myself, "Don't be an idiot, it's just kids." That thought hit me then, like a slap. Kids wouldn't leave a coffee mug that hot behind. They'd smash it, take it as a trophy, or dump it in the yard. They wouldn't move the curtains and leave them hanging loose, half tied with a shoelace. They wouldn't disable the radio in my cruiser, radio, by the way, that had served me without fail for 2 years straight. And they wouldn't vanish so completely that I found nothing but echoes and dust. I circled back through the house, each step gathering tension in my legs. I combed every closet, flipped every light switch, none worked, and eased open the back door until it clicked against the frame. A breeze carrying that scent, earth, wet leaves, something metallic, hit me as I crossed the threshold. I pressed my torch into the field's edge, highlighting rows of corn stalks brittle from the end of harvest. And then I saw them, glints of silver scattered among the stalks, bullet casings, half buried in the mud. I stepped forward, heart locking up. This wasn't just prowling. This was something else. Something prepared. I backed out, slammed the door, and locked it behind me, fumbling for the button on my cuffs. My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped them. I hadn't radioed anything yet. I was too stunned, too aware. Backup was an hour away. I was alone with casings that didn't belong to me or any patrol rounds we used. I pressed the mic. "Dispatch, this is 103. I've got rounds in the east field." Possible shots fired. Static roared in response, and I felt hot blood on my face. Sweat or fear, I never figured which. I stayed until the moon slid behind clouds, until the fields melted into gray, until the thought that I might be walking into a trap turned into certainty. I grabbed the casings, shoved them into my coat, and drove back to the station in silence. Lights off, siren off, hoping whatever had scattered those shells would think twice before tracking me back home. For days afterward, I couldn't sleep. Every crack in the wall sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like a breath against the window. I found myself wandering out to that field in broad daylight, retracing the shells, scuffing the ground with my boots to see if any new prints had arrived. Nothing. Only the farmer's scarecrow, stitched with a bloodstain where a crow had pecked it clean the week before. I didn't tell anyone about the casings. I filed the report under suspicious activity, tucked the shells into a bag, and stored them in evidence, unexamined. I knew that if I reported them, they'd get analyzed, traced back, and I'd have to answer questions I wasn't ready to face. Because if those shells echoed anywhere else, in Marion or Monticello or Oak Ridge, they'd show a smoking barrel, a muzzle flash, another officer's adrenaline spike. But no one had reported shots fired. So to admit those shells existed was to admit I was missing something bigger than me. I worked my shift as though nothing abnormal happened, writing tickets for expired tags, checking in drunks off the highway, but my mind was miles away, out in that field. Every time I hit the radio for backup, I half expected dispatch to answer with a warning. "They're on to you." Every time I checked the rear view, I could almost see headlights trailing me, matching my turns, pressing me toward the county line. The days blurred into weeks. I started sleeping with my phone on, too afraid to leave it charging on silent. I played music at 2 in the morning. Anything to patch the silence with a human voice. I even set up a cheap camera in my living room, pointed at the front door, like some conspiracy theorist. I watched footage of my own empty hallway, blinking timestamps across the screen as if proof of life. And then the call came from Marion. The church parking lot, the running car, and the Polaroid in my glove box. I drove toward it with the weight of everything I'd tried to ignore resting on my shoulders. I felt the phone buzz in my pocket. A text from dispatch asking if I was still on call. I stared at that message long enough to wonder if answering might break a spell. When I finally pulled into that rain-slick lot, headlights glancing off puddles, I realized that whatever was happening wasn't random. It was planned, it was measured, and it was personal. I opened the door of that blue sedan, feeling the leather underneath my palm as though it held answers I couldn't read. I lifted the Polaroid and studied it under the dome light that had malfunctioned the moment I scooped it up. The chapel stood empty, gray steps slick with morning dew, sunlight barely touching the spire. Written on the back in the same shaky ink, "See you at home." I left that car running for an hour, called in from a payphone a mile down the road, my voice flat, rehearsed. 103, possible break-in, vehicle unlocked, keys in ignition. I'm out here investigating. Dispatch said they'd send someone. I stayed until they arrived, never touching the Polaroid again. I came back to Pine Hollow that night, the Polaroid burning a hole in my jacket pocket. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat, I just sat on my couch, staring at the photo until the edges curled. That's when I realized it wasn't about the shell casings, or the footprints, or the missing pastor in Marion. It was about messages. A trail of breadcrumbs meant to draw me in, step by step. And somewhere out there, someone was watching me pick them up and leave them behind. The snow started falling around 3 a.m., dusting the fields in white. I watched from my window as the flakes drifted, each one a silent note in a song I didn't understand. I checked my phone again, no new messages, just the Polaroid's words echoing in my mind. "See you at home." I put the Polaroid in a drawer, shut it, and turned out the lights. But I didn't sleep, because I knew that no matter how far I ran, or how many towns I patrolled, or how many warnings I ignored, the next call was already written in the silence. And the field was waiting for me to step back in. How do you fight a ghost that's leaving you physical traces? How do you chase a phantom that talks back through your own radio? I don't have answers. All I know is that conviction settled in my chest like a stone. Somebody's training me, testing me, learning me, and I'm the syllabus. I handed in my resignation 2 days later. I drove my Charger out of Pine Hollow PD with the windows down, letting the cold November wind rip through the cabin. I threw my badge in the inspector's box and walked away without looking back. But I never got rid of that Polaroid. It's hanging on my fridge right now, ever since I moved to Lincoln. I look at it every morning before coffee. The white border frames that empty chapel like a doorway. And sometimes when I'm not looking, I swear, I see someone standing on those steps just beyond the frame, watching me through the glass. I'm done chasing shadows. But I'm not done listening. Because in the silence of my new apartment, every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind at my window, every static, burst on the radio at night, it's a message. It's a test. And I'm still inside the curriculum. I don't know when they'll call me next, but I know they will. And next time, I'll be ready. Or I'll be foolish enough to answer. I woke up that morning feeling every muscle in my back like it had been run over by a rig. The kind of ache that settles deep, where stretching only reminds you it's still there. I showered without touching the water heater. Let it run cold, let the shock wake me up. In my kitchen, I poured 2 mugs of coffee, one black and strong enough to sting the tongue, the other milky and sweet, just in case I needed a momentary escape. I sat at the table with the Polaroid laid out before me, the faded image of Alabaster Chapel staring back like an accusation. I traced the words, "See you at home," with a fingertip, feeling the embossed ink press into my skin. I'd thought that by ignoring it, by walking away from Pine Hollow, I could leave the nightmares behind. But they'd followed me, shadowing every routine, poking through the cracks in my new life. My apartment in Lincoln was on the 4th floor, windows overlooking a parking garage and the distant skyline. Not exactly a fortress, but at least it felt anonymous. I'd registered my alarm and changed all the locks, yet every time the wind rattled the frame, I jumped like someone was trying to kick it in. That morning, as the sun lifted into a pale haze, Dispatch sent a follow-up. Any further details on that vehicle in Marion? I ignored it. My phone buzzed with texts. Old partners checking in, the sergeant wanting to know why I'd stopped answering calls. I didn't reply. I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and left it face down on the island. I needed to feel my own rhythm again. By noon, I was on the interstate heading south toward Beatrice, Nebraska. There'd been an odd incident at the Cedar County Fairgrounds. An alarm tripped at the old livestock pavilion after hours. No cameras at that site, just motion sensors tied to a system that a local volunteer firefighter checked when it went off. They wanted a familiar face, one who could file a decent report. I told them I was effectively retired, but a few calls later, and my sense of duty wrestled me into the cruiser again. The pavilion sat on a flat plain dotted with pasture and fence posts. I parked under a lone lamp that hadn't been painted since the 80s, its metal pole pitted with rust. My boots crunched on gravel as I approached the sliding doors, locked with an old padlock that had once been painted glossy red. Now it was matte black with age, layers of dusty cobwebs festooning the edges. I tapped the side of it with my maglite. No movement. I called out, "Beatrice PD, state your business." Half joking, half hoping someone inside would break the silence. No answer. I popped the lock with bolt cutters I'd stashed in the trunk. Muscle memory from years of training. The doors groaned open, revealing faded banners overhead. "Welcome to the Cedar County Fair." Sawdust drifted in the pools of light cast by my flashlight, swirling like ghosts at my feet. I swept the beam across empty rows of bleachers folded against the walls, overturned folding chairs, and the smell of old hay lingering in the beams. Nothing out of place except the platform stage in the center, a plywood ramp leading up to a small dais where they used to hold livestock auctions. I climbed onto it, every step raising a cloud of sawdust. At the front edge, someone had scrawled in charcoal, "Here," with a jagged arrow pointing down at the floorboards. The grain of the wood was splintered in places, like heavy boots had scraped across it. I crouched and ran my gloved hand over the markings. Cement dry. Not fresh, but not so old it wore smooth. I peered under the stage. Nothing but rat droppings and discarded soda cans. My radio kicked in, loud enough to make me jump. 23, you there?" I muted it and replied quietly, "On site, investigating suspicious alarm." As I turned, my light caught something at the back wall, a high window with thick glass, dirty but intact, through which I glimpsed bright sky. But at an odd angle, I also saw a dark shape pressed against the pane, low and crouched. I flicked my beam there fast, and the shape vanished in a blur. I half expected a kid in a hoodie, or someone filming some prank for views, but no one answered my shout of, "Hey, step away!" The silence pressed back. I climbed down and searched the perimeter, finding footprints in the mud along the building's side. Size 10 boots, deep treads heavy with wet clay. The prints led to a ventilation grate at ground level, bent outward. I couldn't see inside, but I heard it. A faint metallic jingling, like keys rolling around in someone's pocket. My heart caught. I crouched by the grate and pressed my ear to the cool metal. The sound stopped. Complete silence. I pulled out my backup camera, the one that records handheld footage, and shoved it through the opening. The monitor showed a narrow crawl space lined with dusty insulation. Something glinted on the foil lining. A set of identification cards, municipal badges from sheriff's departments across 4 states, one of them mine. I pressed record and shook the grate until it clanged free. Inside, scattered across the ground, were more Polaroids, each shot taken at dawn of a police cruiser parked outside some random building. Churches, schools, community centers. and on each someone had written in the same trembling ink, "How long until you notice?" Cold swept through me, rattling sweat down my spine. I jammed the cards and photos into an evidence bag, heart pounding so hard I could feel it through my chest. I scrambled back out, locked the grate behind me, and ran to my cruiser. I fired up the engine, peeling rubber down the road. My breath shuddered in short bursts. I hit the radio. "Dispatch, this is 23. Shots in the pavilion. Crawl space. Evidence of someone crawling under. Send backup and crime scene." For once, I didn't need to hide the tremor in my voice. I sped back to Lincoln with sirens on, lights cutting through the late afternoon haze. I booked in the evidence, backed away, and sat in the observation room for hours until detectives arrived. They called me in for statements, photos taken, comparisons made. I watched them pore over the cards, my badge, my name, my face smiling from a desk at Pine Hollow. They found the other cruisers, the other Polaroids. They'd been sending them out in the mail, addressed to local PDs with stamped envelopes inside. The letterhead read, "To the officer whose eyes never turn away." That phrase haunted me in the weeks to follow. I kept replaying it in my head, weighing each word. They knew my routine, knew how I'd never ignore a call, how I'd answer even when I'd sworn I wouldn't. They baited me. Every false alarm, every phantom in the rain, every broken radio. It was never about catching me in the act. It was about proving I couldn't stop myself from stepping right into the dark. I asked the sergeant to pull my file, see if any of these tactics had been used before. There were 3 cases, states I'd never been posted to, where officers vanished for days after reporting unusual activity. When they returned, they'd crash their cars into ditches or hand in resignations mid-shift, eyes hollow as old, snuffed-out candles. No charges, no cause of death, just missing time. And sometimes those officers never spoke of what they'd seen, as though the memory was a wound they'd bandaged and thrown away. I knew then the game had changed. It wasn't enough to scare me off. It was to break me, piece by piece, and I realized the only way out was to look directly at those razor-edge clues, gather them all, follow the breadcrumb trail until I found who was orchestrating this campaign of whispered threats. Winter settled over Lincoln fast that year. Snow piled in drifts 2 feet high, and the wind howled like a freight train through the alley behind my apartment. I sat at my desk, surrounded by Polaroids, shell casings, footprints casts, charcoal etchings on plywood and drywall. Every bizarre call I'd answered since that first night. I charted a map connecting Marion to Pine Hollow, Monticello to Beatrice, Oak Ridge to Cedar County, and then back to the towns I'd never been dispatched to: Kilgore, Texas; Westbrook, Maine; Tallulah, Louisiana. Places spread across the country with coordinates that spelled out a loop, a wide, impossible circle. I stared at the map until the paper blurred. Each town was a node, each node a challenge. Could I find the pattern in the madness? Could I trace the orchestrator? Whoever they were, they'd taken their sweet time designing each scenario, pulling me out at specific moments, flipping my instincts against me, teaching me to question my own senses. But I was learning too. Each trail piece taught me their style: the broken radios, the equivocal footprints, the Polaroid threats. It was a language, and I was finally fluent. I packed my laptop and the evidence bag into the back of my SUV and left the Lincoln behind. I headed north first. Pine Hollow still felt like ground zero. I needed to see that farmhouse again, stand in the dew-soaked grass, check the frost lines. Then I'd hit Marion, trace the road to Alabaster Chapel, feel the slump of the pews under my hands. Then Monticello, Beatrice, Oak Ridge. every place where they'd touched me, nudged me, pulled me deeper. I drove through blinding snowstorms and bone-chilling wind, following the skeleton of clues like a hound on a scent. Each stop, I collected postcards, talked to deputies at shift change, pieced together local rumors. In Pine Hollow, they remembered a man in a dark coat slipping off toward the oaks, but they'd said he vanished into the branches like mist. In Marion, the pastor recalled someone videotaping the church steps at dawn, leaving the Polaroid on a pew. In Cedar County, the volunteer firefighter said he heard sobbing from beneath the pavilion floor. Then the alarm went silent. No one dared search the crawlspace. Everywhere I went, the story was the same. Things happening just outside rational explanation, leaving people second-guessing their own eyes. By the time I reached Kilgore, Texas, 6 weeks later, I was carrying an arsenal of K-chain evidence. Audio recordings, photographs, witness statements, lab reports. I'd looped around the country twice, chasing a chalk outline of a person who might not exist, or might be stepping into each town an hour before me. I checked into a motel under an alias and laid it all out on the bed. Physical evidence, timelines, maps, printouts. I worked through the night marking times when the sun rose and set on each incident, calculating drives between towns, cross-referencing fuel receipts. Every pattern converged at one place: Kilgore. The last stop on the initial loop, and the only town with an abandoned railroad yard set against a stretch of scrubland. At dawn, I climbed the rusted tracks, frost cracking under my boots. The yard was a tangle of old freight cars, graffiti smeared across steel sides, weeds pushing through track ties. I followed the rails to a small office shack, windows boarded, lock encrusted in rust. Inside, yellowed papers littered the floor. Train manifests, shipping logs, coordinates. One sheet had a list of towns with dispatch codes next to them. Pine Hollow, 1127. Marion, 315. Monticello, 147. Cedar County, 247. Oak Ridge, N.A., and beneath it, scrawled in that same trembling ink, next, Lincoln. I heard the rails groan behind me. I spun, maglite raised, but saw nothing, only the empty railbed fading into dawn mist. My radio chimed with an incoming text. "You left something." I blinked at the screen. No sender ID. I opened it. A photograph. My face, pinned to a bulletin board behind yellow police tape, my badge number scrawled in black. 23. I dropped the phone. The photo fluttered to my feet. I looked up at the shack's bulletin board, dozens of Polaroids pinned in a grid, each one a face framed in the dark. Me, other officers, uniformed and off guard. Next to each, a date. Dates of resignation, discharge, disappearance. Mine, cornered in the top row, no date yet written. That's when I heard a voice behind me. Calm, measured, almost bored. "Daybreak suits you." I didn't turn. Footsteps trod on gravel. "You've done well following the breadcrumbs, but there's one thing you still don't understand." My hand went to my holster as I finally whirled. No one there. Just the shifting light through that battered shack window. Yet the voice hovered behind me, heavy in the thinning air. "This isn't a game about fear. It's about control. And so far, you've demonstrated neither." I swept the beam around, searching for a body, a pair of eyes reflecting light. Nothing moved except dust motes dancing in the slivers of sun. The radio in my pocket crackled to life, static, then a whisper. "Now you're playing on our turf." I took a breath, forcing my voice steady. "Who are you?" The breeze stirred a flap of paper pinned to the board, a single Polaroid I hadn't noticed before, taken at dawn in my own kitchen. The Polaroid from Lincoln, the one on my fridge, corroded at the edges. I moved closer, written across it, "Goodbye." Behind me, in the fog, the rails groaned again. I didn't wait to see if it was a train. I bolted for the shack door, hearing a soft click as it swung shut behind me. I wrenched it open, stumbling into the open yard, wind tearing at my coat. I sprinted down the tracks, unseen presences flickering behind each freight car. The sun climbed higher, light stabbing through the mist. I don't know how far I ran before I heard my phone go dead. I didn't look back. I just kept going, the rails humming beneath my boots, the last Polaroid burning in my pocket. Because at the end of the loop, there's no finish line, only the tracks stretching into forever. And they're waiting for me to follow them again. I didn't stop running until the gravel turned to pavement and my lungs felt like they were scraping the inside of my chest. The sun was higher now, burning off the fog, but the cold that settled in my bones didn't lift. Every step echoed the dread that had been building since that first farmhouse, as if the ground itself was pushing me onward, demanding I follow this trail, even as every instinct screamed to turn away. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a reminder that I was alive, that I still had choices. Choices they were trying to take away. I slowed when I reached the edge of town, boots splashing through melting snow in the gutter. I pulled the phone from my pocket. Dead, black screen. The Casio-like thump of its shutdown lingered in my mind. No texts, no calls, not even a sign that the network still registered. I stared down at the Polaroid in my hand, crumpled, edges curling with moisture, and the black-inked word "goodbye" staring back like a dare. I tucked it inside my jacket and took a steadying breath. The morning air tasted of rust and diesel, mingled with the faint sweetness of melting ice. It felt real, solid. I could touch it, smell it, live in it. And yet, the weight inside me felt heavier than any coat. I looked around for my SUV but saw only the rutted rails stretching behind the yard. No footprints, no tire tracks. Nothing but the wake of my own passage. It occurred to me then that I wasn't sure where I was going. I'd followed clues here, yes, but now I stood with no map, no signal, only a constellation of horrors imprinted on my memory. Pine Hollow, Marion, Monticello, Beatrice, Cedar County, Oak Ridge, Kilgore, Lincoln. I could recite their coordinates in my sleep, but I still had no idea who or what was behind this. Someone, or something, had orchestrated a twisted cross-country wake-up call, designed to break me more than scare me. And so far, they'd succeeded. They knew my patterns better than I did. I set off down the side street, boots squelching, until I found a diner with a flickering neon sign. Blue Moon. Fogged windows. Door locked. No coffee, no crumbs. I settled on the curb and listened to the world waking up around me. Distant engines, the scrape of tires on asphalt, a dog barking. Not the hush of midnight or the pounding in my skull. A broken calm. I closed my eyes, leaned back, and let the noise wash over me. I had to organize my thoughts before I moved again. Flashbacks slid through my mind, one after another, each memory a sharpened shard. The farmhouse, the jukebox humming, then dead, the chapel car with the Polaroid, that hello scrawled in grease, the footprints that vanished, the baby shells in the field, the panic in my own reflection. All of it had a rhythm, a pattern. They surfaced a vulnerability and then withdrew, leaving me alone in the dark to reckon with the aftermath. It was a calculated back and forth, like someone playing chess against an opponent who didn't realize they were in the match until too late. I opened my eyes and spotted an old rotary phone booth across the street. Its glass cracked, but still intact. Inside, the handset dangled on its cord. I stepped over broken glass and pulled the receiver down. The dial tone hummed. Weak, but alive. I sat on the edge of the seat, heart racing, and pressed my thumb into the rotating disc, dialing the Pine Hollow PD's number. Each click felt like a countdown, but no one answered. Just the hiss of line static. I hung up, waited, dialed Marion PD. Click, 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 silence. Then Monticello, Beatrice, Cedar County, Oak Ridge, Kilgore, Lincoln PD. Nothing, only dead air, only absence, and the static breathing in my ear like an invisible watcher. I replaced the handset and stepped back into the street. My reflection rippled in the cracked glass. Face drawn, eyes darting. I couldn't trust what I saw, nor could I trust what I heard. Every creak of a signpost, every passing car seemed keyed to a sinister pattern. So I made a rule. I would move only when the world gave me no choice. No signals, no calls, nothing but footsteps and breath. And by that, I meant my own. I decided to head west, toward open land and fewer towns, fewer roads that could lead to ambushes. I wanted distance, space. I flagged down a pickup truck heading out of town, a local with a fishing pole strapped to the back. "Need a lift?" he asked, squinting against the sun. I mumbled directions to the county line. He nodded, barely looking at me. I climbed in the passenger seat, feeling the leather hug my thigh, windows cranked down, wind whipping. He seemed ordinary, hands calloused, cap pulled low. Didn't ask questions. Drove me 5 miles until a narrow dirt road veered off. "Good luck," he said, tipping his hat. I slid out and watched him disappear around a bend. I was alone again, just me and that dirt track climbing into scrubland. No footprints this time. No broken radios, no scrawled warnings. Just the ruts of tire treads and the thin strip of sky overhead. I followed the road until I reached a shallow gully. The sun petered behind clouds. I decided to rest, marching into the brush until I found a boulder to lean against. The Polaroid pressed hard in my coat pocket. I thought about ripping it up, destroying the evidence of their intimidation. But something in me hesitated. I needed to remember every taunt, every clue. It was my only map. I closed my eyes and let my thoughts drift, and that's when the whisper came. Soft as moth wings, but unmistakable. "Davis." I snapped my eyes open, empty field, dry grass bending in a breeze. But the sense of being watched tightened around me like a noose. I peeked over the boulder, saw a scrap of black fabric snagged on a bramble. A glove, perhaps, the kind cops carry. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating nothing but grass and earth. No footprints. The glove didn't move. It clung to the branch as if someone had hung it there deliberately. My throat went dry. I shook my head, leaned back, and closed my eyes again, only to hear it more clearly, a voice off to my left, calling my name in a calm, familiar tone. "Davis, you're too slow." It came from behind a stand of mesquite trees. So I rose, heart rattling, and walked into that grove. Branches scraped my coat, twigs cracked underfoot. The air smelled of sage and sun-baked soil. Then I saw them. 3 Polaroids pinned to the bark of a skinny tree, each one showing a scene I'd left in chaos. The farmhouse threshold, the chapel steps, the pavilion stage. 3 records of my own fear, plastered on bark. On the ground, someone had laid out 3 shell casings, identical to the ones I'd found months ago, stenciled in white paint on the underside. Hope, trust, home. But the words were scratched out one by someone's fingernails. They were replaced, crudely, by fear, doubt, alone. I swallowed. My hands felt numb. I crouched to gather the casings. Behind me, they stepped from the shadows, 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, silhouette sharp against a patch of bright sky. I didn't see a face, just the outline of a figure in a long coat, gloved hands at its sides, a slight tilt of the head. It carried something, a camera. I leveled my flashlight. Instead of retreating, the figure raised the camera, aimed it at me, clicked. The flash bloomed like a star. I raised my free hand and shouted, but my voice caught on fear's jagged lip. When the lightning glare faded, the figure was gone, slipped back into shadow. Only the faint click of leaves in a breeze marked the departure. My flashlight beam drifted, revealed empty ground. No footprints, no tracks, nothing but disturbed dirt. I pocketed the casings, retrieved the Polaroids, and stumbled back onto the road. My ribs burned, my legs trembled. I didn't look back until I saw headlights closing in. A sheriff's SUV rolled up, siren off, lights flickering amber. "Officer Davis," the driver said, sliding down the window. "We got your call. Someone left this for you." He held out a single Polaroid. I recognized the image, me, standing in that grove. Flashlight beam sliced through darkness, wide-eyed, mouth open. On the back, in the same unsteady scrawl, "Too slow." I didn't stop to thank him. I opened the door, slammed it, and climbed in. As we drove back to the highway, I pressed the photo to my chest. The window rattled, and I realized clouds had shifted, leaving a thin ribbon of sky overhead. I stared out at the scrubland passing by, each mile marker a countdown to something I didn't want to face, but I knew this wasn't over. Not by far. When we reached the junction, he dropped me off without a word. I stood on the asphalt, sun warming my face, wind whipping my hair. In my pocket, 6 casings rattled like bullets in a chamber. In my hand, a Polaroid of me, frozen in fear. And in my mind, a single question: how do you fight someone who's already gotten inside your head? I tucked the photo behind my badge, slid the casings into my coat, and started walking west, toward the horizon, toward distance, toward anonymity. Because if I stayed on the beaten path, if I let them predict me again, I'd end up right back where I started, answering midnight calls in empty towns, stumbling into trap after trap, piece by piece losing myself in the darkness they'd crafted. So I walked. Gravel cracked under my boots. Tires hissed past on the blacktop. The world stretched out, indifferent. And somewhere far ahead, beyond the next rise, lay another challenge. Another town, another chance to prove that I wasn't just a pawn in their game. Because despite every dent to my mind, every threat scrawled in grease and ink, I still had one thing they didn't: the will to move on my own terms. And as long as I could walk away, I could and would keep fighting. The road curved into the morning light, and I kept my eyes on that bend, waiting for what came next. I keep thinking about that moment in the grove, how the figure pointed the camera at me, how its absence felt heavier than its presence, the way the Polaroid of me, standing exposed in that silent woodland, slid from the sheriff's hand like a stone, thudding in my palm before he drove away. I was left alone on that crooked rural road, the sun a pale promise behind high clouds, and nothing but my own ragged inhale filling the space where thunder ought to be. I walked until the pavement gave way to dirt again, following the shoulder where grass fought through gravel. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the horizon, where fields of brittle corn stalks bowed in the breeze, and the sky met the earth in a line so thin it felt like the edge of a blade. Each footstep was a vow. I would not let them herd me. I would not become another Polaroid pinned to a tree or left on a pew. I would not vanish like a whisper. After miles of slow walking, my legs grew heavy. My coat, already dusted with roadside grime, absorbed the sweat along my collar, and my throat tightened with every dry swallow. I flagged down another passing vehicle, a beat-up van with two men in work boots and grease-stained jackets. They looked at me, at my uniform shirt under the windbreaker, at the Polaroid tucked into my hand, and didn't say a word before one nodded and the other opened the passenger door. I slid in without speaking. He hit the gas, and we rolled down that path toward the county highway. The van stank of motor oil and fast food wrappers. I perched on the edge of the seat, fingertips pressed to my knee, as if I could hold myself together through muscle memory. They dropped me at a crossroads where Route 45 met a two-lane county blacktop. I paid them with a nod and a crumpled bill, then set off again, the sky darkening behind approaching storm clouds. It was late afternoon, though the light was already folding in on itself, shadows stretching like reaching hands across the fields. It occurred to me then that I hadn't eaten since morning. I found a rundown general store at the next bend, neon sign flickering. Open. Inside, the fluorescent bulbs hummed, and the floor tiles creaked, stained with years of spilled coffee and dropped candy bars. I grabbed a soda and a pack of beef jerky, paid with tip-scraped bills, then stepped outside into that brittle gray light. I sat on a wooden crate under the store's awning, tearing into the jerky and letting the salt catch on my tongue before washing it down with cold soda. I flicked the Polaroid from my jacket and looked at it again, me, lit by a narrow beam of flashlight, eyes wide. The camera had caught my fear, unfiltered, and flattened it into an image I couldn't escape. I thought about burning it, turning it into ash and scattering it in the wind, but I didn't. I slid it back under my windbreaker's lapel and leaned back, watching dust lift from the gravel when a pickup idled past. The dirt bank at the road's edge was stamped with tire tracks so fresh the edges were still sharp. I recognized the tread, size 10 square-toe boots, like the ones I first found at that farmhouse. I rose and followed those tracks, boots scuffing on the packed earth until they led to a low ridge where a single tall pylon held power lines high into the sky. At its base lay a collection of Polaroids pinned to the steel leg with masking tape. Each image was a face I knew. Officers from Pine Hollow, Marion, Monticello, Cedar County, Kilgore, Oak Ridge, and one unmistakably mine. They formed a curious sequence, a timeline of broken radio calls, running cars, phantom figures, scrawled chalk, and bullet casings. Beneath each was a date and a single word: listen, answer, respond, fear, trust, alone. And under my photo, live. I knelt, pressed a hand to the image of myself standing in that grove, the lens flash frozen in time. The tape was fraying, edges curling, but the faces were clear, eyes unblinking, mouths set in lines of horror or confusion or rage, each a testament to a moment when someone pressed on them until something inside snapped. I felt the breeze rustle those Polaroids like a sigh through the high grass. Behind me, a crackle of static, sharp and sudden, snapped me to my feet. My hand dropped to my holster, instincts flaring. I swung around, no one, just the horizon's darkening clouds and the hum of power lines overhead. I jabbed the button on my radio, nothing but static. I pressed it again, voice hoarse. "This is Davis. Anyone copy?" Static. And then, almost too faint, my own voice, distorted. "Davis, are you there?" I staggered back, heart seized. The tape held the Polaroids flapped, and the world tilted. My blood pounded like a war drum in my ears. Another click on the wind, and I realized I wasn't alone. I raised my flashlight, beam dancing up the pylon, across the wires, down to the ground. And there, half hidden behind a coil of cable, a second figure emerged. Tall, angular, wearing a long coat that merged with the dusk. No features visible, just that silent posture, watching. My chest tightened. I told myself to speak, to project calm, but my mouth tasted like rust. "Who are you?" I managed. No reply. Instead, the figure tilted its head and raised a gloved hand, pointer finger extended, then lowered it to tap a Polaroid pinned beneath mine. A photo of my daughter's Little League team. My daughter smiling in the front row, unaware of the danger swirling around her father. Beneath her picture, in the same trembling ink, "Next, family." Rage and terror collided in me. I unholstered, aiming at that empty silhouette. "Show yourself," I barked. The metal of the barrel warmed in my palm, weight grounding me. The figure shifted, and in that movement the sky behind it cracked with thunder. A jagged bolt rasped across the plains, followed by a breathless silence. The figure vanished. No footsteps, no echo. Only the hum of lines and a single Polaroid fluttering to the gravel at my feet. The image of my empty living room in Lincoln, couch cushions thrown aside, the Polaroid of the chapel on my fridge left glaring on the coffee table. Lightning forked again, closer now, and I realized how exposed I was. How deep this went, into my home, into my mind, into the life I tried to rebuild. I crouched, snatched the new Polaroid and stuffed it into my pocket. My legs felt like lead. I tapped the mic once more. "Dispatch, this is Davis. I need an address at once, and send someone for backup." The reply crackled in immediately. "Unit 103, status," and something in me twisted. I realized that even now, when faced with the most direct threat yet, I responded by summoning help. Exactly what they had scripted all along. Another test, another proof of instinct. I shut the radio off, dropped the mic. My reflection trembled in the pylon's metal, two lights flickering in rivets like sad eyes. I looked at the Polaroids, at the horizon, at that tall pylon dangling wires above endless plains, and I knew this wasn't about survival. It was about choice. How far would I go to protect what mattered? What would I sacrifice to stop the next shutter click? I rose, scrap of wind tearing at my coat, and began the walk back to my SUV, every step measured, every glance scanning the tree line. I passed under the pylon's legs, brushing my hand against one of its cold bolts. The Polaroids clung there like ghosts, and I heard, just faintly over thunder, my own voice humming over the static. "Davis, are you there?" The line went silent. I kept walking, and as I disappeared down that dark ribbon of road, the Polaroids fluttered free from the pylon, drifting down like dead leaves, etching fresh footprints in gravel where no human foot had stepped. The last one landed face down in a puddle, ink smearing into water. One word left legible: "You." The storm broke behind me, rain washing away tracks and smudging the images, but one certainty remained. No matter how far I walked, no matter how many towns I outran, the next note in this symphony of terror awaited my answer. And if I didn't respond on my own terms, if I ever let that radio fire up again, I would find myself back at the farmhouse, the chapel, the pavilion, or worse, at my own front door. I set my jaw against the growing wind, boots sinking into the churned earth of that lonely road as I moved away from the power lines. Every mile I put between myself and that pylon felt like I was carrying less weight, until I realized no distance could unhook the anchors they'd driven into my mind. The photograph of my daughter's team burned in my coat pocket, a reminder that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything I'd built my life to protect. The sky darkened into bruised purple as I reached a stretch of abandoned highway where the blacktop cracked into ribbons of grass. I paused beside the mangled skeleton of a roadside diner. Eddie's. The faded sign still clung to its post. The windows were boarded, but inside I could almost hear the clink of dishes and laughter spilling from the jukebox. I thought of that first farmhouse, the lone jukebox humming in the dark. The way its dying tune had sounded like someone calling me forward into the night. Here, the place was dead silent, save for the whisper of wind through broken glass. I skirted around the building and picked up a battered Polaroid someone had left plastered to the wall beside a cracked restroom door, my own cruiser, parked at the edge of a field. I crouched, my breath fogging the image, and there, scrawled in that familiar ink, alone. The message was simple, elemental. Cut down every line of support until you stand shoulder-deep in fear, knowing no one will come if you cry out. I pressed my fingertips to the photo, cold, almost damp, and slid it into my pocket. Another piece of the roadmap, another test to see how I'd respond. I shook my head and forced myself upright, stepping into the road. My cruiser was nowhere in sight. I'd left it hours ago. My only company was a half-moon glint on the horizon, a single headlight bobbing far off down the highway. I hesitated, then turned toward it. Each step toward that distant light felt deliberate, like walking the plank of my own sanity. The pavement crunched under my boots, and the wind carried echoes of my own voice from weeks past. "Are you there, Davis?" I pressed forward, silent now, refusing to answer. When I reached the headlight, I found an old school bus parked at the road's curve. Empty seats lit by a single interior bulb. The door stood open. Steam rose from the engine bay, no rain today, but I crouched behind the wheel, heart pounding. Footsteps creaked across, metal steps. I raised my maglite, swept its beam through the windows. Empty, but I sensed movement behind me, low and deliberate. I risked a glance. No one, just my own shadow flickering on the road. I climbed aboard. Every rung rattled like a bone. The aisle stretched into darkness. I made my way to the back, each creak of seat springs echoing. Then I saw it. A Polaroid taped to the rear window, rain-smeared but still legible. My daughter's face again, hair in ponytails, laughing on the school playground. Underneath, next, home. My vision swam. I backed out of the bus like I'd stepped into a fever dream, stumbling onto the blacktop. The interior bulb flicked off with a pop. Silence fell heavy. I dropped to one knee, pressed the photo flat on the hood of the bus, and ran my thumb over her smiling eyes. My daughter, proof that this monster's reach didn't end at department lines or county roads. It reached inside the walls I'd built around my home. I needed help. I needed proof. I yanked my phone from my pocket, still dead. My backup battery warmed in my palm, useless without signal. I looked up the road where that headlight had come from earlier. No sign now. Only the black ribbon of highway stretching into nothing. With every heartbeat, the message burned hotter in my mind. Next. Home. I made a decision. I would not hand the monster another victory. I would not run blind. I would lure it into the open on my terms. I would set every trap I could imagine, map every incident, gather every scrap of evidence. I would find the one place this predator never expected, the center of its own network. I stood, boots firm on cracked asphalt, the wind whipping around me like a judge's robes. I would fight back. I would call in every favor, every detective friend who still answered the phone, every analyst who could trace a Polaroid back to its printer. I would flood its channels, buy time, protect my daughter. I would shine a spotlight so bright that the architect of this crusade of terror couldn't hide in the shadows any longer. Darkness pooled at my feet as I turned on my heel and walked back down the highway, toward where the road met County Line Road, toward the cell tower that sat atop the ridge, toward the one spot I knew gave me signal. I'd sprint if I had to. I'd sprint until my legs gave out. Because the next message, the final proof, would come not through fear, but through clarity. It would expose the hand that held the camera. And when it did, I would be waiting. I hunched forward in the driver's seat, the heater rattling like it was ready to give out at any moment. Pine Grove, Missouri, in early autumn, it should have felt quiet, almost comforting. Instead, the chill in the air pressed against my spine like a promise that something was out there, waiting. I thumbed the radio mic, but all I got was that familiar backdrop of static and distant voices arguing with their own echoes. It was 10:47 p.m. when dispatch piped in. Hang-up call from the corner of Route 67 and County Road J. No answer on callback. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and let out a low breath. Route 67. I'd been on that road more times than I could count, but tonight it felt foreign, like a winding trail that never quite led you home. I shifted the cruiser into gear and rolled out, the siren off, lights dim. There was no point in announcing my approach. Whoever, or whatever, had called in wasn't looking for a rescue. 10 minutes later, I parked on the shoulder under a solitary streetlight that buzzed like it was dying. The road stretched north and south in equal darkness. To my left, a church spire rose against the sky, though I knew it was long abandoned. Behind me lay a farmstead whose windows reflected back like blank eyes. I killed the engine, and the silence erupted. Tires hummed from a distant field road. An owl called once, twice, and that was it. I stepped onto gravel, my boots crunching with every careful move. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the faded stripes on my jacket. I stood at the intersection, radio pressed to my hip. Dispatch, Monroe, I'm at the location, no sign of caller. The landline must have rung them in from the old church. My words felt hollow in the open air. They tried you again, came the clipped reply. Just once, no call back. I'll check the building. I didn't mention that the church door was padlocked and decades of rust had sealed it shut. I walked the perimeter, flashlight skimming broken panes of stained glass. Someone had pried a loose window near ground level. The shards of glass lay scattered like forgotten confetti. I crouched, peered inside. Pews overturned, dust motes dancing in the flashlight circle. No footprints, no blood. Only the faint scent of mildew and something metallic I couldn't place. I stepped back, the wind catching my collar and tugging me toward the cruiser. Nothing here, dispatch. Just an empty shell. My voice cracked, caught on the cold. I clicked the radio off, climbed back in and locked the doors. The church's silhouette followed me down the road until a curve swallowed it whole. The next call came in at 11:15 p.m. A truck, white Ford F-150, running under the marquee of a shuttered hardware store in Monticello, Arkansas. I live for details like make and model and location. They're small anchors in a sea of nothing. I punched it south on Route 67, headlights tracing the double yellow line. By the time I arrived, the store's front window had been boarded up years earlier, but the sign still hung, swaying with a hollow creak. The truck's hazards blinked slow and methodical, engine tick-ticking as the metal cooled. I ran the plate, registered to a local mill worker named Roger Hansen. His record showed no warrants, no trouble. Beneath the hardware sign, I saw where someone had scraped mud off the windshield. You didn't get that close to the glass without looking inside. I drew my sidearm and slipped out, careful to keep it concealed under my jacket. The beam from my flashlight landed on the driver's side doorway. Open. I approached, the metal frame warm to the touch. No Roger. The driver's seat held his jacket, his lunchbox, both untouched. No hat, no phone, no sign he'd intended to step away long. I checked the bed of the truck. Tools, oil cans, a saddlebag. Everything present, everything accounted for. I called it in. I've got the vehicle. Driver's gone, no signs of struggle, lunchbox in place, no footprints in the mud around the truck other than mine. Dispatch asked if I wanted backup. I declined. Backup wouldn't help. Only answers would help, and I was fresh out of answers. By midnight, I was on the road again, listening for the next ping. The radio crackled. Caller reports a cruiser parked outside the old mill on County Road 3. They say they saw headlights cut into the trees at 11:50. I didn't recognize County Road 3. It wasn't in my usual patrol area, but it fell under Pine Grove's jurisdiction when it branched off Route 67, so I went. The old mill was nothing more than a sagging concrete foundation and two jagged steel beams reaching for the sky. Nature had already claimed most of it. I parked 50 yards away, engine idling. Mist curled from the cornfields, thickening into a low fog that swallowed the beams, then spat it back out with a breathy hiss. I flicked on my flashlight and followed the supposed path of oncoming lights. The trees leaned together overhead, branches interlocking like clasped fingers. My boots sank in wet leaves, and I felt that familiar prickling behind my eyes, the warning that came when I realized I wasn't alone. I swung the light around, heart hammering. Nothing. No headlights, no rustle beyond wind, only me and the night. I called it in. Mill site's clear, no one around but me. Dispatch sounded bored. Who could blame them? Patrols made at midnight under a damp canopy of trees, chasing phantoms. But I heard it then, a muffled crunch, like someone stepping on dry twigs. I swung the flashlight back. For a heartbeat, I saw a shape. Tall, hunched, moving away. One glimpse, and it vanished. I blinked, and the beam met only fog. I took a step forward. The trees seemed to close in, branches drumming against each other high above. My breath came ragged, my mind racing. I clicked off the flashlight and reached for my radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at the mill. Something's out here." My voice sounded strained. The line went dead on the first chirp. Static took over. I pressed again, dead air. Panic slicked my palms. I flicked the light back on and bolted back to the cruiser. The engine roared to life as I slammed inside and locked the door. My pulse throbbed in my temples. I called dispatch from the mic. "Don't send anyone." Scratch that. Request canceled. I'm heading back. My voice trembled, but I couldn't let them send reinforcements into whatever I'd just disturbed. The ride back to Monticello was a blur of reflections in the rearview mirror. Every shadow looked like a body creeping up. Every patch of fog, a hand reaching for the car. I kept glancing back, expecting to see the white truck or Roger Hansen, or that shape from the mill. But the road stayed empty, and the night held its secrets. From there, the calls came more frequently. A sedan abandoned on a church lawn in Franklin County, headlights still bright enough to blind you at the edge of the driveway. A pickup left in the drive of a farmhouse 2 miles from any road. A school bus parked endwise on a back road, doors open as if waiting for kids who never boarded. Each time I arrived, lights off, engine silent, and found the vehicle exactly as described. No keys in the ignition, no driver in sight, no footprints leading away. Dispatched units arrived later, a day shift deputy or state trooper, and always found the same thing. Vehicles left running, doors open, interiors untouched. People began talking. Rumors wove through local diners, gas stations, grocery stores. They said those places were cursed. that every time someone stumbled into trouble there, the road swallowed them whole. They said if you parked on Route 67 after dark, you risked vanishing, engine ticking down to nothing. I overheard it all, nodded politely, filed formal reports. But inside I felt a cold knot of dread. We'd handled missing persons before, single events. This was a pattern, an impossible pattern, and I was the only one chasing a ghost that never left a trace. By the end of that first week, I'd tallied 6 incidents, each one triggered by a mundane call, abandoned vehicle, hang-up, silent alarm. Each one ending with a vehicle left running and a person gone. And always, I was the first on scene. My cruiser's interior filled with radio chatter and coffee-stained paperwork. Night after night, I patrolled the stretch of road that should have been empty, and found it haunted. I started bringing a notebook, scribbling every detail. Time called, location, make of vehicle, weather conditions, anything at all. I wrote down leaf patterns in the grass, marks on the pavement, the direction of the wind. I wrote until my hand cramped and the pen ran dry. I had entries like September 14th, 11:47 p.m. 2012 Ford F-150. Hazards on. Church Road, fog 30-yard visibility. Interior warm, no footprints. September 15th, 12:02 a.m. White Chevy sedan. Driveway of farmhouse at County Road 9. Engine ticking. Corn stalks trampled leading east. No sign of driver. The more I wrote, the more the details blurred together. The same conditions, the same emptiness, the same strain behind my eyes. I felt like I was crawling through the loop of some nightmare that repeated itself. And every dawn I dragged myself back to the station, passed my notes to the day shift, and watched them toss my pages into file folders, rattling like bones in a drawer. I began skipping dinner. The station microwave hummed powerlessly in the corner, and I'd stare at it, tempted, but the thought of hot food felt distant. Coffee was enough. Black, no sugar. And by the time I drove home, the pot in the break room would be empty again. I slept in 15-minute stretches, waking at every creak of my house. My wife, Lisa, complained about the porch light staying on, but when I tried to explain, she just shook her head and said, "You're in your head again, Bobby. You need to rest." I mouthed an apology, turned off the living room lamp, and watched the glow of my phone screen until I drifted off. It was during one of those half-sleeps that I dreamt I was back at the church. The stained glass window glowed from within, shining colors so bright they cut through the night. Someone stepped into the beam of my flashlight, tall and silent, and my voice stuck in my throat. Then the colors shattered and I woke, sweat dripping from my brow. The clock read 3:16 a.m. I rolled out of bed and grabbed my jacket. I never told Lisa why I left. I said I had paperwork to finish, a report to file. In reality, I needed to feel that darkness again, to taste it and see if it would tell me something I couldn't hear on the radio. I parked at the church lot under a sky so cold it made the air brittle. I climbed out, flashlight in hand, and the hush wrapped around me tighter than any cell door. But the broken window was repaired. A fresh board covered the opening. Paint looked new. I tapped on it. No hollow sound. Then I saw footprints in the gravel. 2 lines leading away from the lot toward an overgrown path behind the building. They were human, adult size, but they trailed off after 30 feet, swallowed by long grass. My radio crackled, dispatch asking if I was busy. I didn't reply. I flicked the flashlight on, clipped the mic to my belt, and stepped off into the grass. The beam pierced the weeds, and I followed the prints where they led. But they vanished just short of the tree line. Only footprints in the soft earth remained. I sank into the underbrush, looking for signs. Snapped twigs, dropped items, anything. The only thing I found was a single shoe, black work boot, scuffed at the toe, half buried in dried leaves. It wasn't Roger's boot, not Lewis's. I'd never seen it before. That boot should have meant something. Ownership, identity, evidence. Instead, it sat there, silent and meaningless, like a challenge. I slipped it into an evidence bag and headed back. Tomorrow, I'd catalog it, send it to the lab. Tonight, I just needed the warmth of the cruiser. I climbed back in, cranked the heater. Steam fogged the windshield, and I wiped a circle free, looking out at the darkness. My heart pounded so loud I thought the engine would suddenly stop. I reached for the radio, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, only a few paces beyond my headlights. I flicked off the engine and rolled down the window an inch, freezing cold biting my face. The footfalls stopped. I stared into the dark, heart in my throat, but couldn't see a thing. My breath turned white. I called out, voice low, "Show yourself." No answer, just the wind winding through the trees. Then a whisper, so soft it could have been my own imagination. "Why are you here?" My blood turned to ice. I slammed the door, locked it. The whisper came again, closer, almost inside the patrol car. "You shouldn't have come back. The section ends here, but the roads are still waiting. I can't say what's next. I can't say who or what answers those calls. Only that somewhere out there in the hush of the night, a pattern loops forever, and every cruiser that follows its lights may find itself swallowed by the silence, never to come back." I sat frozen behind the wheel, engine off, every muscle taut. The whisper, "You shouldn't have come back," echoed in my skull. My flashlight lay abandoned in the passenger seat, but I didn't dare reach for it. Outside, the world was still, the wind gone silent as though the earth itself held its breath. I waited, counting the seconds by the rhythm of my own pulse, and then, when nothing moved, finally let out the breath I'd been holding. I clicked the driver's side window closed, the glass sliding up with a harsh screech that felt too loud in the quiet. My fingers hovered over the mic, but I didn't report it. Dispatch didn't need to hear that I'd been spoken to by empty air in an abandoned church lot. Instead, I started the engine, letting the heater coils thrum to life, and I pulled back onto Route 67, headlights carving a path through the mist. The pager in my coat buzzed, a forgotten alarm reminding me of the time, and I silenced it without checking. Time had lost meaning. On the drive back to town, my mind replayed that whisper. A voice with no mouth, words arriving through some unseen channel. I thought about the boot in the evidence bag. Scuffed, ordinary, yet placed there by something malevolent. I thought about the pattern. Vehicles abandoned, drivers vanished, and how this place seemed to demand sacrifice without reason. By the time I rolled into the station parking lot, sweat had chilled on my skin, and I made myself sit at the desk until minutes ticked by. The station lights burned white and sterile, a poor refuge from the darkness outside. I tried to call Lisa. I left a message on her cell. "Sorry, I'll be late." I didn't mention that I'd spent the last 30 minutes listening for a phantom voice. I packed the boot and some notes into an evidence envelope, signed and dated it, then shoved the folder into the evidence locker. As I closed the door, I caught a glimpse of the bulletproof vest hanging on the wall, empty sleeves dangling like ragged wings. I reached out and touched it, feeling the weight of it, the same weight I carried in my chest. Morning came with the sun burning away the fog, but leaving the chill behind. I sat through a briefing with Detective Ramos and Patrol Captain Fowler. They asked about the boot. I described where I found it. They asked if I saw anyone. I said no. They nodded, told me to keep logs, and funnel data through the usual channels. Then they moved on to traffic accidents and break-ins. The disappearance cases were becoming background noise, just another unsolved file on the desk. By dusk, I was back on patrol. My cruiser smelled faintly of stale sweat and microwaved burritos, evidence of skipped showers and skipped meals. I drove the stretch of Route 67 in reverse, east to west this time, scanning each pull-off, each abandoned lot. My eyes darted between rearview mirror and side mirror, searching for headlights that might cut across the dark. At mile marker 12.7, the overhead sign flickered. Next service is 30 miles. I killed the headlights, letting the road disappear under the blackness, and slipped past the sign like a ghost. Then, not 2 minutes later, the radio lit up. Unit 4, we've got an abandoned SUV on County Road 12. Hazards flashing. Plates matched to a Helen McAllister. I felt the old surge of adrenaline. Something about the pattern made me feel alive. I muted the siren, thumbed the mic. On my way. The SUV was parked under a broken street lamp whose globe had cracked long ago, its inner bulb exposed to rust and rain. The rig was a 2015 Jeep Grand Cherokee, red streaks over chipped white paint. The AC fan ticked, the dash glow faint. I cut the engine and killed the lights. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, and circled the Jeep. The driver's door stood open, the seatbelt fastened around no one. I tapped the horn, just a quick pry, nothing. Inside, the radio station dial sat between numbers, as though the driver had fumbled and left it there. The center console held a coffee cup, half full, lipstick-stained rim, dry to the touch. A smartphone lay on the passenger seat. Screen lit up. One missed call, Mom. No notifications, no texts. I pocketed the phone and clicked a photo for the report. Then I heard it. A car door slamming far down the road, maybe 60 yards away. I spun. Toward the sound, light beam landing on empty road. No vehicle in sight, no taillights. Just the asphalt shining wet under my beam. I dialed dispatch. Ground is clear here except for this vehicle. Hearing occasional thumps from the road, but can't see anyone. They asked if I needed backup. My answer came fast. Yes, please send a unit. I didn't want to be alone anymore. While waiting, I examined the Jeep more closely. On the floorboard lay a pile of receipts. Gas station, grocery, hardware store, dated for the past month. Nothing out of the ordinary. I picked them up, flipped them over. On the back of the hardware receipt, someone had scribbled an address in Marion, Ohio. That was 75 miles east. And at the bottom, scrawled in rushed pen, "Help me." My heart ratcheted. How did "help me" end up scratched on a local receipt? Was it a joke? A note from a kid, or a message from someone who knew they'd vanish? A flash of movement caught my eye. At the edge of the street lamp's glow, a man's jacket draped over the guardrail. Strange, no one would leave clothes behind. I walked toward it, the gravel crunching under my boots. As I neared, I saw that the jacket's inside pocket bulged with keys, a wallet. I picked it up, flipped it open. ID card read Helen A. McAllister, same name on the plates. So she'd come back, like a breadcrumb, but without her. I zipped the jacket and the wallet into an evidence bag. That's when I heard the panting, rapid and shallow, behind me. I froze. Footsteps, not far, but off the road, from the cornfield's edge. I clicked off my flashlight, but the beam wavered until it died. I reached for the radio. Dead air again, static only. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. I called out, cautious, "Miss McAllister." "Helen?" The panting stopped. I waited. Then, in the distance, a low humming, like an engine idling, but no headlights. A metallic buzz, like high-voltage lines, but closer, more rhythmic. My flashlight flickered back on, as though it had its own will, and I saw footprints leading from the SUV into the cornfield. Bare footprints. Nothing but the dirt pressed into the earth. I followed them, crunching husks beneath my boots. The corn stalks brushed my shoulders. Smell of damp earth sharpened my nostrils. The footprints led deeper until they circled back, heading south toward a barn I hadn't noticed on the map. I exited the field onto a narrow footpath. Moonlight broke through clouds, revealing the barn's silhouette. Timber gray, doors ajar, darkness swallowing its interior. I pressed my back against the barn's wall and raised the flashlight, trailing its beam inside. Rusted farming equipment lined the walls, spiderwebs in every corner. I half expected to see Helen crouch there, but the stall was empty. My beam swept over wooden crates, overturned barrels, and then landed on scrawled words on the far wall. "Help me, Gen 3. The letters, jagged and uneven, looked fresh, dark against the peeling paint. A chill crawled up my spine. I snapped a photo, heart hammering, then heard that humming again, louder now. It vibrated in the air, a cyclic pulse. I whipped the flashlight around, no machinery, no generator, just empty stalls. The humming grew, matching my heartbeat until I thought my chest would burst. I took a step back, and foot caught on something on the floor. I looked down, a pair of jeans, frayed at the hem, with a single boot missing. The same black work boot I'd found outside the church lot weeks earlier. My flashlight beam wavered as I bent down and scooped it up, confusion and dread mixing in my gut. I turned to leave and froze. At the doorway stood a figure, thin, hunched, wet hair plastered to its face. It held one arm out, pointing toward the edge of the field. I barely registered the shape's breath, a rasping sound like wind through rusted metal. I swallowed. Words caught between my throat and my lungs. My hand trembled on the flashlight, and I saw that the figure's jacket was the one I'd bagged. Helen McAllister's name stitched above the breast pocket. But no flesh showed where her face should have been, just darkness, as though the barn held her head instead. I fired off one shot from instinct, but the figure didn't flinch. The light glare blinded me for a moment, and when I blinked, it was gone. The humming ceased. Silence engulfed the barn. I stood alone, rain beginning to patter on the tin roof. I backed away slowly, every nerve screaming, until I reached the field's edge. I sprinted across the corn, the stalks slapping my arms, until I burst onto the road and jumped into my cruiser. I smashed the lock, started the engine, tires spinning on gravel. I peeled out, headlights carving arcs into the night. I pressed the siren high and grinding, even though no one was coming. I didn't stop until I hit Route 67 and pointed the cruiser west, lights blazing, until the fog and fields stretched behind me like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I pulled into the station at 2:17 a.m. and left the cruiser running. Doors open, my notes and evidence strewn across the passenger seat. I left the keys in the ignition and the engine roaring, a warning echoing down the lot. You came back. As I stumbled into the briefing room, the pager on the table buzzed again, 3 missed calls from dispatch. I silenced it, heart pounding as if the figure from the barn had its hand on my chest. I knew then that this wasn't about finding Helen McAllister or the others. It was about something older, something that claimed each of them, and left their stories scrawled in boot prints and hung on rusted walls. I woke the next morning with bruises on my arms from running through the field. My uniform was stained with mud and sweat. The barn's words, "Help me" at Gen 3, played in my head on a loop. My partner found me huddled in the jail cell, black coffee in hand, eyes bloodshot. He asked if I was okay. I nodded, unable to speak the truth, that I'd seen her face, and I knew it wasn't human. I left the station early, called in sick, saying I had something personal to handle. I drove past the church first, its board repaired, no sign of the broken window. Then I came back to that mill foundation, where years ago I'd heard that shape moving in the trees. I stared at the beams, but they offered no comfort. Just iron and stone, markers of an empty place that kept calling me back. Now I keep my cruiser running in the lot, hazards blinking, engine ticking. I leave the doors open, light on inside, and I sit, waiting. Waiting for a call, waiting for footsteps, waiting for the hum. Because I know what's coming next. Another empty car, another silent call, another whisper asking why I'm here. And I'll answer every time, because I have to know how far this goes. I'll chase the pattern until I vanish, until my own boots are found treadless, waiting for someone else to come back and wonder why. The cruiser's engine hummed loud enough to drown out my rational mind. I watched the gas gauge dip lower than I'd ever dared let it. Route 67 didn't have many stations after dark. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. Each mile felt like it stretched into an hour. I forced the shifter into drive and rolled forward. The dashboard clock read 3:02 a.m., and I could almost swear the humming followed me, a heartbeat buried beneath the roar of the engine. I turned down County Road 9, gravel giving way to dirt so deep it kicked up in plumes. I'd memorized these roads by their quirks. The low bridge, where floodwaters once stalled patrol cars. The split-rail fence where someone had smeared red paint last summer. The solitary silo standing guard over empty fields. Tonight, every landmark seemed to leer at me, as though the land itself had grown weary of my intrusion. At the fork near McAllister's barn, my headlights caught on fresh tire tracks leading off the rutted path. I recognized the tread, deep, narrow imprints matching the Jeep's tires. I killed the engine and listened. The humming stopped. The night held its breath. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, boots sinking into mud, slick enough to slip. I followed the tracks to the edge of the cornfield and found where someone had driven in, to the very spot where I'd left the barn's door ajar. I pressed the mic to life. Dispatch, Monroe. Need an air unit over the fields east of County Road 9. Possible tracks, Jeep, unknown direction. No immediate response. Static, then, copy that, Unit 4, ETA 30 minutes. I clicked off, crouched in the mud, and traced the tracks with my gloved hand. They veered northwest, cutting through the rows of corn like a path to nowhere. I heard the walls of corn rip and rustle as I stepped in, flashlight beam dancing over yellowed leaves and dry husks. The path narrowed quickly until it disappeared under a canopy of stalks. I crouched lower, radio clipped to my belt in case I needed to call for help. Each footstep echoed in my skull. I felt the corn press in around me, pressing against my shoulders, scratching at my jacket. I reached a clearing so small my beam swept its entire circumference. Bare dirt ringed by stalks leaning inward like grasping hands. At the center lay a single item, a crumpled photograph, face down. I pried it free of the dry earth, flipped it over. The image was grainy but unmistakable. A smiling woman in uniform, Helen McAllister, standing in front of the same church where I'd first answered the hang-up call. Behind her, the old stone church looked newly painted, wreaths on the door, bright in the noon sun. On the back, scrawled in the same jagged script, "Remember me." I tucked the photo into my pocket and shone the beam around the clearing once more. I saw tracks, footprints, definitely human, matching the boot tread from the church and barn scenes. They led east, deeper into the field. I rose, eyes stinging with sweat or fear. I couldn't tell which, and followed. The cornstalks whispered as I brushed past, but no wind moved through the rows. I kept thinking I'd see headlights or feel a presence beside me, but the field was empty except for me and my own ragged breath. The footprints led me 40 yards before I stopped at a mound of disturbed earth. The flashlight beam trembled as I shone it over a squat circle of turned soil. I knelt and dug with my hands, pulling away clods until I exposed hard metal. A GPS unit, its screen cracked. I wiped it clean, saw the home screen reading Marion, Ohio, and a set of coordinates I didn't recognize. Beneath it lay something harder, an envelope. I pried it free, slid it open with my thumbnail. Inside was a single page, a handwritten note on lined notebook paper. "Carl," it read, "you're closer than you think. The pattern holds, but who wrote the code? Meet me where it began. No signature, no date, just the scrawl in black ink." The cornfield silence pressed down on me, and I realized I couldn't hear my engine anymore. I swept the beam behind me, no cruiser. My stomach lurched. I clicked off the flashlight and strained to hear the engine's hum. It was gone, replaced by my own pulse banging in my ears. I fumbled for my keys. Nothing in my pockets except the note and the photo. I unzipped my jacket. No keys in the pocket. Not in my belt either. My flashlight trembled and died. I stood in the pitch-black field, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd crumble. I flipped the beam back on, half expecting it to snowball me into oblivion. The clearing was empty. No keys, no vehicle, just the churned earth and empty sky. I called out, voice loud, "Dispatch! Monroe here, anybody copy?" Static answered. I hit send again and again. The cornfields closed in. Then, through the hush, I heard it, far off but unmistakable. A siren, faint, approaching. It came from the east, growing louder. I ran toward the sound, racing through the stalks, stumbling over roots and mud. My hands clawed at the air, tearing at leaves as I pushed forward, desperate. I burst onto the dirt road, lights flashing. A county cruiser screeched to a halt beside me. Deputy Vasquez rolled down his window, face pale. "Carl, what the hell?" He jumped out and grabbed my arm. "What happened? I got your call but couldn't locate you." Then the keys went dead on the cruisers. Radios dropped. No response from dispatch for a minute. Then backup showed up. "You're lucky." I didn't hear him. I saw my cruiser 50 yards behind, engine ticking, hazards blinking. The doors were wide open. My hand went to my pocket, empty. I reached down and pulled out the photo and the note, trembling. Vasquez must have seen it because he took a step back. "Monroe," he said, voice low. "Your cruiser." I cut him off, voice flat. "It's calling me back again." He didn't argue. He just nodded and reached for his radio, but the device rattled in his hand with the same dead air. He stared at the cornfield's edge, where headlights shone faintly against the stalks. "It's waiting," he said. I swallowed, eyes locked on the field. I felt the echo of that whisper in my bones. "You shouldn't have come back." My lips parted. "I know." The humming started again, soft at first, then rising in pitch. I looked down at the note. "Meet me where it began." Then up at the corn, at the path I'd followed. No answer present. Just the fields, hollow and breathing. And all I could do was step forward, into the whispering stalks, letting the night pull me back into the pattern, deeper than I'd ever gone before. I didn't hesitate. I plunged back into the corn, the stalks slapping my jacket like frantic hands trying to push me away. Deputy Vasquez stayed at the road's edge, shouting my name, but I was already gone. pulled by something older than fear. My flashlight, now recovered when I fumbled out of my jacket pocket, cut a thin beam through the rows, illuminating swirling dust motes that looked like ghosts dancing in the light. The note was damp in my hand. Meet me where it began. I kept glancing at it, half expecting it to burn away in my grip. My boots thudded in the soft earth, following footprints that had to be fresh. The dirt still held the depression of weight. I knew these prints, too wide to be mine, too precise to be random. They led me northward, toward where the county road bent and the abandoned church lot lay waiting. Every step felt like a decision, a surrender. My radio crackled to life, static, then a single voice. Monroe? Monroe? Vasquez. I swallowed hard. I'm fine, I rasped. Keep the road clear. The line died again. I blinked and realized I'd stopped speaking. No answer, just the hum of night pressing in. I shoved the radio into my pocket and pressed on. The field opened into a shallow depression, and I saw it. The corner of the church lot, where the broken stained glass window stood. But now, the window was whole. A perfect circle of colored glass that should have taken decades to restore. The church facade, which I'd known as crumbling stone and creeping ivy, now looked freshly painted. The overgrown grass at its base had been cut, the lot cleared, as though someone had prepared it. I stepped onto the gravel, flashlight beam slicing through the mist. My stomach knotted. The door was closed tight but not locked. No rusted padlock, just the latch slipping shut on its own. I approached, hand on the cold wood, and caught my reflection in the glass. Dark eyes rimmed with exhaustion, uniform flecked with mud, radio hanging at my hip. Beside me in the gravel lay another boot, scuffed and empty, its mate nowhere to be found. My breath hitched. Each inhale felt like fire. I thought of the missing. Braxton, Hanson, Simmons, Gilroy, McAllister. Each vanished into the night, leaving behind vehicles, pockets, families haunted by silence. And now I stood at the place where it all began for me, the place that called me back. I pushed open the door. It groaned like a wounded animal. Inside, the pews were upright, spotless. Candles on the altar flickered, even though there was no breeze. Looking up, I saw a single beam of moonlight slanting through the restored stained glass, painting the aisle in blood red and cobalt blue. My flashlight's beam danced over the floor, and I spotted writing carved into the wood of the first pew. Section 3, though I knew it wasn't a title, just the scrawl of someone marking my progress. Beneath it, a set of thumbprints pressed deep in the varnish, too clear to be old. I swallowed hard and pressed forward, every muscle screaming. I knelt at the altar, heart hammering. There lay a small recorder, one of those digital voice memo devices. I recognized it. The station had issued them 6 months ago for backup communication. Someone had taken mine and returned it here. I clicked play. A crackle, then my own voice. This is Monroe. I'm at the old church lot. Everything looks normal. The recording cut off, then resumed. My voice but slower, strained. There's someone here. I can't see them. They're moving away from the window. No, toward me. The final words were a whisper, distorted. Help me. My blood ran cold. I pressed stop and tossed the recorder into my jacket. Above me, the cruciform window glowed with unnatural light. I stood, flashlight trembling as I raised it to scan the rafters. Something moved, garments hanging from a beam, fabric shifting as though caught in a breeze. I walked down the center aisle, each step echoing, and as I passed the final pew, I caught sight of something on the floor. A photograph, blown up to poster size, pinned to the wooden plank walls. The image showed me, standing in uniform at the county fair, waving to children. my face frozen in a smile, except the eyes were scratched out, blackened beyond recognition. My radio crackled again, static thick, like static trying to say something. Then a voice I didn't recognize, soft, hollow. "You're almost there." I spun, flashlight beam landing on empty air. Then at the back, a shadow slipped behind the organ, too swift to follow. I raised my voice. "Show yourself." My own words sounded desperate. The reply came in the form of a shuffle. Footsteps on the creaking floorboards above. The balcony, where long ago churchgoers sat, now held rows of empty pews. Empty, except for silhouettes smoking into the darkness. I dared not shine my beam upward. Instead, I edged toward the rear exit. My boot caught on something. A folded piece of paper stuck beneath the door. I picked it up, looked down. My heart throbbed. I turned my flashlight to the floor. Dozens of footprints, leading from the door all the way to the altar, then back toward the balcony. Some prints were bare, some wore the black boot I'd collected twice now. All were human. I dropped the note, clenched the flashlight tighter. Above, the footsteps paused. A scraping, like nails dragged across wood. Then, in the hush, I heard a soft humming, like the very walls breathing. I backed toward the door, flashlight sweeping until I reached the step. I grabbed the handle, yanked it open, and was blinded by headlights. 4 cruisers lined the lot, lights flashing red and blue. Officers spilled out, guns drawn. Deputy Vasquez ran up behind me, barking my name. I turned the flashlight on them, beam shaking so badly it caught in their astonished faces. Captain Fowler stepped forward, voice tight. "Carl, what happened?" I barely registered him. My eyes darted to the altar, now empty, and then to the balcony. Nothing but shadows where figures had thronged a moment before. The aisle lay undisturbed, no footprints, no blood, no record of the horrors I'd just felt. The recorder in my jacket buzzed, dead battery, and I realized my radio was silent too. My voice came out strangled. "It's not over." I held up the photograph, smile intact, eyes blackened. The officers exchanged glances. Fowler stepped forward and took it from my hand, examining it. I watched his face go pale. He folded his arms. "Monroe, I'm ordering you off this case. You're coming into the station." He motioned to Vasquez. "Escort him." Vasquez took my arm. I didn't resist. As we walked past the pews, I looked back at the altar one last time. In the beam of the flashlight left behind, I could have sworn the stained glass window had shifted, colors bleeding into the stone, shapes warping into faces. Outside, the mist curled over the gravel, headlights washing it in silver. The church doors closed behind me on their own, latch clicking. I glanced back. The lot was empty, all except one car, my cruiser, hazards blinking gently, engine ticking in the night. And in that final moment, as I stepped into custody and grabbed at Vasquez's shoulder, I heard the whisper again, closer than before. "You made it this far, but the next turn will be your last." They cuffed me and hauled me into the station as if I were a perp instead of the man who'd chased ghosts down Route 67. My uniform was caked in mud, pockets empty but for that bloodless photograph and the note I'd shoved in my jacket. Captain Fowler barked orders, file a statement, submit to debrief, get a psych eval, while Vasquez kept watch, eyes darting as though he half expected the Barnes figure to follow me inside. I sat in the interrogation room under a single fluorescent bulb that flickered like a dying heartbeat. The chair's metal frame was cold against my back. Fowler slid across a folder. "Tell me again, Deputy Monroe. You saw what, exactly?" He tapped the photos I'd turned over. His tone was polite but distant, the same way a doctor might ask about a ruptured organ. I recounted the barn, the doorway, the figure wearing Helen's jacket, the eyes that were nothing but black hollows. I spoke of footprints in mud that led nowhere, of messages scrawled in fresh blood or earth. Help me. Remember me. You shouldn't have come back. I told them about the humming, the whisper in the church, the way the world seemed to fold beneath my boots. They listened, note-taking with heavy pens. When I finished, Fowler leaned back, folding his arms. No physical evidence, he said. Recordings corrupted, battery dead on the recorder, nothing in the field except prints that washed away overnight. He tapped the desk. Your credibility is in question here. You know that, right? I told him that credibility didn't matter if the missing people never returned. He sighed. I get that, but we need proof. Until we have proof, those families have no justice, and you'll be off the case until we can confirm anything. I nodded. They processed me through admin, removed my car keys, sent me home in a taxi. I remember the ride, streets empty, neon lights blinking, wipers sweeping rain that had decided to fall after a dry week. I sat alone, head against the glass, watching my reflection slumped against the city. When I got home, Lisa was awake, living room lamp still on. She said nothing. I found her tucking our daughter into bed, my 9-year-old, eyes wide at the sight of my suit crusted with dirt. I dropped my head. Lisa asked if I was okay. I forced a smile. Just a long night. I wanted to tell her everything, the whispers, the vanishing, the church's perfection. But I didn't. I took off my jacket, shoved the photos and note into a drawer, and walked upstairs without a word. Sleep didn't come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan's silhouette, listening to the house breathe. My mind looped on Meet Me Where It Began, on the return to the church, the barn, the cornfield. I imagined footprints circling the bed. My pulse knocked like a war drum. And at dawn I slipped on my boots, grabbed my jacket, and walked out the door without waking anybody. I drove to the station. No lights, no radio, just the engine's hum. The gate to the evidence locker was open. They'd forgotten to rekey it. I eased inside, rifled through boxes until I found the one labeled Route 67 Missings. I grabbed my notes, the scattered receipts, the pager with its broken screen, and stomped back to my cruiser that sat parked behind the garage. By noon, I was back on Route 67, following that old pattern. Hang-ups, abandoned cars, empty fields. No badges, no uniform, just me and the ghosts. I heard the thrum of my heartbeat in my ears, matched it to the wiper's rhythm. Every turnout I passed reminded me of another case file. Hanson's pickup under the hardware sign, McAllister's Jeep by the barn, that school bus parked crooked on the back road. At the church, I pulled in under the lone floodlight. It didn't flicker. Inside, the door stayed locked. The lot had been mowed, the first time I'd seen the church cared for in years. I found footprints in the gravel, 2 sets, side by side. One matched my boots, the other was too small, slender, like little kids' shoes. They led to the pried open window. I pressed my hand to the sill. The glass was cold, the edges sharp. I climbed inside. The pews were gone. In their place, chairs arranged in a loose circle around the altar. On the makeshift stage stood no cross, but a table with a laptop, its screen glowing. A live feed from an empty barn back near Monticello. The footage was grainy CCTV, overnight angle, low to the ground, aimed at the stall where I'd found the black boot. And there, in the frame, someone moved, a blur of dark jacket and hollow face, drifting through the shadows. I felt bile rise. I reached to shut it off. Keyboard locked, password prompt. Next to the laptop lay a stack of Polaroids, edges curled with age. Hanson's pickup under the hardware sign, the school bus, the barn doors. Me lying on the floor in the interrogation room, cuffed and splayed, as if photographed by someone standing above. The last photo was blank, just a smear of orange light. Behind me, footsteps on gravel. I spun, flashlight beaming across empty chairs toward the door. No one there. I turned back to the table. A final Polaroid lay face down. I flipped it. The image was my daughter's face, grinning up at the camera. She'd been in bed at midnight. My wife would have been there. I flipped it again. On the back, scribbled, "See you soon." My flashlight died. The laptop flickered off. The barn feed cut to static. And in the hush, I heard the whisper, soft, urgent, "You made it this far." I ran for the window, kicking off shoes, scraping knees on the way out. I tumbled into the gravel lot, lungs on fire, and sprinted to my cruiser. The engine roared to life. I slammed it into gear, tires churning gravel, and peeled away down Route 67, rain sliding off the windshield, headlights forging through the mist. Behind me, the church stood silent, its window-perfect glass, curtains drawn inside. I didn't look back. I didn't slow, but in my mirror I saw headlights, bright and unblinking, following me down the highway, timing each curve, each mile. The sirens died. The radio stayed silent. My heart hammered for the length of the chase, and I knew then that I wasn't running from something outside. I was running toward the end of the pattern, the point where the missing vanished and no one returned. Somewhere ahead lay the final convergence, where the world would fold, and I'd either break the cycle or become part of it. I kept the pedal down, hands tight on the wheel, and raced into the night, chasing the whisper that echoed in my blood, "The next turn will be your last." The highway blurred beneath the tires, rain spattering the windshield in frantic rhythms. My heart pounded so loud I thought the engine might stall. Headlights behind me stayed glued to my bumper. No flashing lights, just two steady beams cutting through the night. I pressed the radio button, static. My breath came in shallow gasps. I shivered, though the heater blasted. I forced myself to slow as the road curved sharply through a grove of pines. The beams behind me froze in my mirror, then turned in unison, following every contour. I gripped the wheel tighter and floored it again. My cruiser lurched forward, engine roaring. The chase continued, silent except for rain and the hum of rubber on wet asphalt. My mind raced back to the Polaroids, my daughter's smiling face, the blank smear of orange light, the blurry figure in the barn. Whoever, or whatever, had arranged that setup knew me, knew my family, knew my fears. And they weren't done. The note in my pocket, "Meet me where it began," burned against my thigh. But the church was behind me now. The next turn lay ahead, and I didn't know what I'd find. A crossroads sign loomed, Monticello 12 miles, Franklin 22 miles. I flicked on the turn signal for County Road 3, adrenaline slamming through me as I veered off. Gravel sprayed in my wake. The beams followed. I steadied my breathing and toggled the dome light, nothing but darkness behind me. No cruiser, no outline of another car. Yet I felt those eyes. County Road 3 was narrower, encased by cornfields that rose like silent sentinels. I kept my speed at 30, just enough to stay ahead without losing control. The road dipped, and I saw once again the hardware store sign, faint beneath the storm clouds. When I passed, I caught a glimpse of broken boards, empty windows, just like before. No truck, no sign anyone had been there. But my headlights picked up something odd on the pavement. A single shoe, scuffed and waterlogged. I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop. My heart thundered as I grabbed my flashlight. Rain stung my face, mixing with sweat. I slid out and stooped. Beneath the shoe lay a Polaroid, face up. A photo of me, battered and bruised, crouched beside the abandoned truck months ago. The handwriting on the back, "Remember this night." My left boot slipped in mud. I kicked at the earth. Prints. Faint, leading down the road. I popped the driver's door open, leaving the engine running, and stepped into the rain, flashlight raised. The prints led off the road into the field. I hesitated, then took a step. Corn leaves slapped my arms. The thrum of boots in mud under the stalk sounded somewhere ahead. I followed, each step calculated, lunging forward when the footprints turned west toward the old gravel pit. Thunder rumbled overhead. Lightning revealed a silhouette. A figure hunched over in the pit's center, head bowed. I approached, flashlight beam cutting through gloom. As I drew closer, I saw what the figure held, an old police badge, tarnished, its numbers scratched away. At its feet, scattered across the mud, were more Polaroids. Hanson's pickup, my interrogation room, the church's window restored, my wife's sleeping face captured through a partially open door. The figure raised its head. Rain soaked its hair, plastered over a face that was everything and nothing. Human in shape, but the eyes were endless voids. Its mouth opened, but no sound came. Only the quantum hum I'd heard at the barn and the church, rising and falling like a pulse. I stepped forward. The pit's walls were banked high with gravel, making escape difficult. The creature held out the badge. I recognized the number. Mine. My breath caught. I wanted to scream, but couldn't find my voice. My hand went to my holster, but the creature shook its head, a slow, deliberate motion. The badge slipped from its fingers and clattered in the mud. I instinctively reached down but stopped when it pointed back at itself, then at me, then at the edge of the pit where my cruiser's lights gleamed like bait. I backed up, flashlight sweeping, adrenaline flooding. The figure let out a low rasp, almost a laugh in the darkness. Before I could react, it turned and melted into the cornstalks. The world went silent. No rain, no thunder, just the rustle of leaves. I stared at the tunnel of corn, heart pounding, flashlight beam trembling. I turned to run for my cruiser but froze when I saw footprints in the mud behind me. Mine, leading right into the pit, and then another set leaving, bare, small, a child's. They headed back to the road, toward family, toward safety. Then I saw it. A lone Polaroid stuck to the front of my cruiser's windshield. Face down. I walked barefoot over muddy ground, heart in my throat, flipped it over. An image of my daughter's empty bed, rumpled sheets, and beside it, wet footprints of a small shoe. I sprinted to the road, yanked open the door, and raced inside. I slammed the door, locked it, and pounded the starter. The engine groaned, then caught. I threw into gear and roared back onto the highway. Behind me, the beams reappeared, following as always. My pulse matched the hornet's hum in my ears. I punched the radio, static. I yelled over the engine's roar, "Leave her out of this!" No answer, just the hum. My vision narrowed to the road and I ran. I didn't know how far I drove, hours, it felt like, until the rain tapered off and dawn light seeped through clouds. The pursuit still lingered, headlights fading in my mirror. I glanced back. 2 points of light, distant, then gone. I eased off the gas. The motor ticked, my limbs quaked beneath me. I pressed the note to the windshield. Meet me where it began. Underneath, I scrawled in the condensation, "Not tonight." The highway stretched empty on both sides. For a moment, I dared to hope it was over. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. A photo of my daughter asleep in her bed. But in the window reflection behind her, I saw a shadow, hunched, watching. No caption, no sender ID. I sat frozen, rain-soaked and exhausted, engine idling. The next turn loomed ahead, curving back toward Monticello, the barn, the church. I closed my eyes and inhaled, tasting diesel and despair. A whisper curled through the cab, almost in my ear. "You're almost home." I opened my eyes. The road stretched on, leading me back into the darkness. I didn't move. The cruiser's hazards blinked. The engine's hum thrummed in my bones, and I realized that the pattern wasn't finished with me. It was only waiting for the next call, the next abandoned vehicle, the next echo of a voice that said, "Are you there?" I sat, breath caught, headlights off, the final crossroads at my fingertips, knowing that whichever way I turned would be the one that swallowed me whole. The crossroads stretched out in front of me, wet pavement shining in the pale morning light. I sat motionless, breath catching on the dash, phone in my hand. My daughter's sleeping face filled the screen, and behind her that shadow, watching, stood silent, unmoving. I tapped the image, zooming in until the pixels blurred. Nothing but a trick of reflection or camera artifact, they'd say, but I knew what I'd seen, and I'd never unknow it. My eyes flicked to the road signs. Left would take me back toward home. I could race through breakfast, change uniforms, pretend the night had been one long, fevered dream. Right led deeper into Route 67 territory. The church, the barn, the fields where every abandoned car marked a marker on the map of nightmares. I could almost feel the ground trembling beneath my boots, calling me back. I cut the engine and stepped out, raincoat flapping in a sudden gust. The sky above was clearing. Clouds scudded fast, revealing a sliver of pale sun. The hum I'd chased so long. It was gone. For the first time in weeks, silence had reclaimed the road. My cruiser's hazards blinked quietly, 2 yellow pulses in the dawn. I walked to the rear bumper, flashlight beams still clipped to my belt. I ran a finger along the scarred metal where the charger had scraped gravel, evidence of my midnight flight. I thought about pulling the keys from the ignition, smashing the taillights, dropping the car onto the field, burn it out, leave no trace. But then what? I'd still be me, still carrying the scars, still hearing those footsteps in the dark. Instead, I bent and retrieved the final Polaroid I'd left stuck in the windshield wiper. The photo's back had a single word, home. On the front, my wife Lisa's smiling face. She'd taken that picture on our first anniversary, sunlight glowing off her hair. I stared at it until the edges curled, then tucked it into my breast pocket. A siren wailed somewhere behind me, distant but clear. Reflex jerked me upward. Headlights swept across the intersection, then a patrol car slowed and swung around, lights off. As it pulled up, I saw Officer Vasquez at the wheel. He cut the engine, door opening with a soft click. His face, rimmed by exhaustion, flicked between relief and reproach. "Carl," he said, voice low. "What the hell are you doing out here?" I shook my head, shoulders sagging. I don't know. I unzipped my jacket and held out the Polaroid. "They sent this, told me to come home." I tapped the picture. "My family's in there." I pointed back the way I'd come. He took a breath, glanced down the road I'd refused to take. "They want to draw you back in, again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out my cruiser keys, tossing them at my feet. "Drop them." I bent and let the keys hit the pavement. They clicked twice. I wanted to scoop them up, fight off the pull of the pattern, but my hand stayed at my side. Vasquez crouched beside me. He put a firm hand on my shoulder, something I'd never felt from him before. "We're heading back. Lock your doors, bring the phone, We're taking both cars. As we climbed in, I saw movement in the mirror. A figure stepping off the road into the field across the intersection. It watched us get back in, then turned and vanished into the stalks. I locked the doors and started the engine. We rolled east, headlights cutting shallow arcs through the mist lifting from the ground. The world felt hollow, like a stage set with only one actor left. Vasquez kept one hand on the wheel, the other drumming the console. I sat beside him, phone lying face up in my lap. A single unread text blinked from an unknown number. The road was empty. No cars waiting, no sign of abandoned trucks or pickups. Monticello's lights faded behind us. The church was nowhere in sight. Finally, I slid the phone out and read the message. We'll be waiting where it ends. No signature, no timestamp, just those 6 words. My stomach rolled. I closed my eyes and let the engine's hum fill my senses again. Steady, insistent, like a heartbeat calling me home. Vasquez glanced over. "What is it?" I didn't answer. I pocketed the phone and sat back, wrists resting on the steering wheel. Ahead, the road curved slightly left, leading into a stand of pines that always seemed darker than the rest. The trees blocked the sky, funneling the road into a tunnel of limbs. "Looks like this is where it ends," I said softly. He nodded, hands tightening. "Together?" I lifted my chin. "Together." We drove into the shadowed curve. The hum rose, not from the engine but from the earth under us. The pines sighed and closed above. In the mirror, daylight vanished, replaced by blackness. The cruiser rolled forward, tires quiet on the damp asphalt. My pulse thudded, matching the chant of the wind through branches. And just before we reached the apex of the bend, I saw it. Headlights behind us. 2 steady beams merging into a single glow, waiting. They didn't flash, they didn't chase. They simply hung there, patient. A promise that some journeys never end. I swallowed and gripped the wheel, knuckles white. Vasquez beside me exhaled, and I felt the car shiver. The road ahead disappeared. Only a curtain of darkness remained. Then the windshield went black. The final moment came too quickly to process. No scream, no impact, just the world swallowed by a void. The engine's hum cut off mid-note, and 2 officers hurtling into the unknown. In the aftermath, the intersection lay empty again. The cruisers vanished, lights off, engines silent, and the pattern closed behind them like a door clicking shut, leaving only the highway and its unanswered question. Who listens for the call when there's no one left to answer? It was late May of 1984 when I first climbed into the cruiser for the midnight shift. Sun gone hours ago and the town dead quiet as a tomb. Huntington's streetlights flickered on one by one, casting those sickly yellow halos over cracked asphalt and empty sidewalks. I'd volunteered for nights because I thought it'd be easy. Just drive the same roads, check in with dispatch every half hour, and watch for drunks or the occasional trespasser. Instead, I learned just how hollow quiet can feel once you realize you're completely alone. The radio crackled to life around 12:03 a.m. with a routine dispatch checking my location. I clicked the mic, gave my call sign. Static. We'd had complaints about interference on this band for weeks. Something in the old relay tower on Folger Hill, maybe. Backup units from Marion were well over 40 minutes away, and by then the kid working dispatch might have gone home. I sighed and eased the cruiser down Elm Street, headlights cutting through a lingering mist that rolled off the river a mile east of town. The undercarriage rattled over potholes I'd memorized in training. A loose floor mat shifted under my right foot, reminding me I still hadn't fixed the damn thing. That floor mat was the first of many small annoyances I'd end up cursing. About 15 minutes later, at exactly 12:17 a.m., dispatch pinged me with something odd. A 911 hang-up from an abandoned farmhouse on County Road 6. The line had stayed open long enough that their audio console showed faint breathing, but no background noise beyond my own radio's hiss. 1034, 911, hang-up at Old Mercer Place, dispatch said, the voice flat like it was reading a grocery list. We got 3 rings, then nothing. Can you check it out? Standard phrasing for routine checks, but something about the way that console glowed in the dark, like a blinking eye, got under my skin. I turned off my lights a half-mile away from the farmhouse and coasted onward with the engine at idle. I didn't want to announce myself until I knew what I was dealing with. The Mercer place hadn't been lived in for years. Roof half-caved, windows boarded haphazardly, a sagging barn that could collapse if you looked at it wrong. The yard was overgrown so thick you'd swear the grass had decided to become trees. I parked behind a fallen pine, lifted my mag light, double-checked the safety on my service revolver, then climbed out and locked the cruiser behind me. The air was still, the only sound my boot tread on the gravel driveway. My flashlight beam danced across rotted floorboards and the peeling paint of the front door. I keyed the mic. 1034, to dispatch, I'm on scene. No sign of forced entry yet. Dispatch crackled. Copy. Backup ETA 45 minutes. I nodded to no one in particular and tightened my grip on the light. Inside, the hallway smelled like rot and mildew. I swept the beam left and right. Spiderwebs draped from ceiling joists, a broken rocking chair on its side like someone tipped it over in a hurry. My foot hit something soft. Newspaper from the 60s, damp and crumbling. I shined the light up to the staircase. A few steps were missing. The console monitor had captured audio of someone exhaling heavily, but the house was silent now. That kind of silence you can taste, thick and stale. I called out, "Huntington PD, anyone here?" Nothing but my own echo creeping back. I made my way to the back door, and the mag light caught the edge of a glove lying on the threshold. Leather, expensive looking. I crouched, picked it up, and the handle to my revolver felt heavier. No prints remained. Rain must have washed them out days before. I slipped the glove into an evidence bag and clipped it to my belt. Something had been here recently. Whatever it was, it knew how to avoid dispatch's ears and mine. I left the house the same way I came, every muscle pulsing like I'd run a marathon, but I didn't touch that glove again until I was back at the station. 2 nights later, I found myself parked near St. Mary's Catholic Church. It sat well off the main road, red brick, steeple-chipped, half its parking lot lights broken. I'd gotten a call about a running car in the lot. Engine idling, headlights off, no one inside. By the time I pulled in, the engine had drowned out half the night's chill. I flicked the overhead lights on and off, trying to catch a glimpse of movement through tinted windows. No one. I glanced at the license plate. Expired tag by 6 months. I ran the plate. No record of theft, but the owner's address came back to a trailer park 3 miles north. I circled the car, half expecting someone to jump out and wave, but there was only darkness. The dash-mounted CB mic lay open, static filling the cabin. A Polaroid photo sat on the passenger seat, a family picture from the 70s, mother and father in bell-bottoms, 2 kids smiling in front of a wood-paneled station wagon. Rain had started to fall, soft at first, then in heavier drips that spattered the roof like nervous fingers. I cracked the door, leaned in, and saw a gold wedding band on the console. No glove box, no glove. I bagged the ring, dusted for prints, couldn't find any. The lot's puddles mirrored the church spire as I walked back to the cruiser. No one claimed that car, not then or later, and dispatch never answered my request to clear the lot after the shift. A week into nights, an alarm went off at the old Freeman Hardware on Main. That place had shuttered in summertime '82, shelves still lined with dusty nails and price tags for items nobody sold anymore. The alarm panel by the back door showed 4 triggers: front window brake sensor, back door contact, motion detector in the main aisle, and glass shatter sensor near the register. I pulled up in front, engine roaring over the still-running siren, then killed the engine. The alarm cut out, but the beeping cadence from the control box continued, like a warped metronome. I forced the front door open with my boot, glass crunched underfoot, and swept my maglite through rows of rusted tin cans and splintered wood crates. Boxes of brass doorknobs lay scattered, and the cash register drawer was pulled out, empty. I texted dispatch again, no answer. The motion detector's wiring lay ripped from its mount, cables trailing over loose floorboards. Whoever did this knew exactly what to disable. I checked the back room and found footprints in the dust. Size 11 boots, deep tread, fresh. They crossed the store twice, leading toward a storage yard behind the abandoned laundromat next door. I called dispatch one more time before climbing back into the cruiser. It was 1:02 a.m. Rain pounded the windshield. I flicked the wipers on high to clear away the sheets of water and drove toward the storage yard, heart thudding. I never found whoever broke in that night. I found a smashed padlock swinging on a fence, empty crates on a pallet, and a black duffel tossed between 2 trailers. Inside the duffel, empty beer bottles, a half-eaten sandwich, and a heartbeat of dread that tattooed itself into my chest. That was my first week on nights. No arrests, no heroics, just empty houses, abandoned vehicles, broken sensors. But every detail felt like an invitation to come back, stick around longer, find out what was really there. And I did, knowing the static in my radio and the loneliness of those streets were far more dangerous than any suspect I'd ever chase. I drove back to the station in near silence, rain hammering the roof of the cruiser like an impatient drummer. The heater was on full blast, but it did nothing to warm the chill crawling up my spine. I didn't call dispatch again. There was no point. I was alone out here, night after night, chasing echoes and glitches, and every oddity felt like a challenge thrown down by someone, or something, who knew exactly how to stay out of sight. By my 3rd week, the calls had escalated. On a Tuesday, I got a call about a stranger wandering on Maple Avenue, soaked through, shivering, looking lost. I found him in front of the old insurance office, the one with the boarded-up windows and "For Lease" sign swinging by one hinge. He was half against the wall, staring at a smashed display window where mannequins once showed off suits. The glass was gone, jagged edges still biting into spilled carpet fibers. He looked up at me with wide eyes and mumbled something about voices on his phone telling him to look inside. He kept wiping his hand across the mud on his coat pocket, like he was smudging out something written there. "Sir," I said, "you okay?" He offered no coherent answer, just backed away until his shoulder hit that broken window. His silhouette was framed by the streetlight behind him. Something about the way the rain dripped off his chin made me lean in, expecting movement. But he didn't move. He just stared, lower lip quivering. I asked if he had ID. No pocket, no wallet. I told him I'd take him back to the station to warm up and see what dispatch had on him. He shook his head, finally speaking in a gravelly whisper. "They told me to wait." I crouched to his level. "Who told you?" He drew a ragged breath, voice cracking. "They said you'd look for me." The hairs on my neck stood up. That was the night I learned how fear tastes, metallic, bitter, and immediate. I put him in the back of the cruiser, doors locked, and turned on the interior light. He sat there in the yellow glow, dripping water onto the vinyl seat, staring at the door handle like it was a portal. I radioed dispatch. 1034, transporting a male subject in distress. Please advise. No answer. Static. I looked back at him. His eyes had gone blank, pupils huge and black. He trembled again, but not from cold, from something else. I rolled down his window just enough for oxygen. He gasped as if the inside air was toxic. I pulled over under a street lamp, told him to step out. He did, stiff-legged, and didn't complain about the cold. He just stared at me, rain sliding off his hood and pooling at his feet. Then he looked down and touched his coat pocket. He pulled out a white envelope, small, unmarked. He held it out to me and said, "For you." I told him not to move. He turned and walked away through the rain, never glancing back. The luminous orange streetlight haloed his retreating figure. When I got out, I found the envelope on the asphalt. Inside was a single Polaroid of me standing by the cruiser, taken from behind. I flipped it over, nothing written. Just my call sign scrawled in thin black ink, 1034. That night the cruiser smelled like wet wool and dread. I tossed the photo onto the passenger seat and left it there. I drove back to the station thinking about how easy it would be to slip into that back seat and watch me, then disappear again. A few days later, I had an unmarked tip, a burner phone number left on dispatch's voicemail. No caller ID, only a recording. Heavy breathing, punctuated by coughs, then a whisper, "Stop looking." That was the entire message, followed by dial tone. I traced the number through a quick check, no identifier. It registered as one of those prepaid SIMs you buy in gas stations. I set up a trace request through dispatch protocol, but it bounced through satellites and local towers so many times that by the time it pinged a coordinate, the phone had long been thrown into a dump somewhere outside Monticello Road. The next night, I resolved to catch whoever was puppeteering this. I patrolled the old trolley line, a stretch of track that cut through cornfields and ended at a wooden trestle. I parked the cruiser on the gravel shoulder, shut off the engine, and listened. The wind, whipping through the broken trestle timbers, sounded like distant screams. I felt the cool mist settle on my neck, then saw a flicker, a lantern bobbing behind a clump of weeds. I flicked on my mag light, sweeping across the field. Nothing but tall stalks bent in the wind, reflecting the beam like thousands of glassy eyes. I took a step toward the edge of the asphalt and heard a click, the snap of a camera shutter. My blood turned to ice. I spun around, shining the light through the cruiser windows. There, in the driver's seat, was the Polaroid from that night on Maple Avenue, now tacked to the metal dash with a rusty nail. I didn't remember putting it there. My hand hovered over my duty belt. No twitch could be trusted. I opened the door, rain spattering inside, and yanked the photo free. One side showed me again, framed by the beam at the Mercer place. On the back, scrawled in the same shaky handwriting, "You know what I see." I dropped the photo. It soaked up water like ink bleeding on blotting paper, turning my stabilo into a smear. That's when I realized this wasn't just about break-ins or pranks. This was stalking. I called dispatch again. Hell, I pleaded, and got nothing but static. My hands shook so badly I could barely twist the key. I sat there in the dark field, rain pounding, and wondered how many times I'd already been watched. At the farmhouse, in the church parking lot, in that hardware store. Every time I thought I was in control, the lights would fail, or the radio would die, and the other guy would keep going. The next twist happened at the county fairgrounds. They were tearing down the old wooden bleachers to replace them with aluminum stands. I got a call, motion sensor tripped by the concession stands. When I rolled in, someone had spray-painted the word "Hunter" across the front of the hot dog trailer in dripping red letters. My cruiser headlights washed over the scene. No skid marks, no footprints except my own, and a trail of red that ended at the edge of a muddy lot. The letters were fresh. Only the top half had dried, the lower half still dripping with rainwater. I left dispatch a message. Graffiti at fairgrounds. Possible threat. No suspects. Request juvenile unit. No answer. So I pulled out my flashlight and found a set of scuffs in the mud. Boot tread, again, size 11. The same pattern I'd seen in Freeman Hardware. They led toward the grandstand, then vanished beneath a pile of old support beams. I crouched, slid my maglite under the structure, and saw nothing but shadows. I leaned in and felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, empty air. Every night after that, I carried a Polaroid in my pocket, the last photo I had of the stranger who handed me that unmarked envelope. I spent hours trying to sharpen that image, but the rain had washed away the details. All I could see was a dark shape, head hooded, figure tall, but no face. I checked that photo before every shift. It felt like a warning or a reminder. I couldn't tell which. By week 4, I was a wreck in plain sight. Dark circles, the cruiser's seat imprint etched into my back. Cold coffee stimulant enough to cut through my nerves for a few hours. I skipped days off, told the family I was doing extra shifts to help with budget cuts. They believed me because that's what cops do, lie to protect each other. I lied to myself because that was easier than facing the fact I was walking into someone's game every time I turned the ignition. On a Friday, the strangest call came through at 2:46 a.m. 1034, unidentified 911 from Marion County line. Caller hung up after breathing sounds. Dispatch sounded bored. Copy, standing by. I turned onto County Road 12, straddling the line between two jurisdictions. The moon was low, a sliver so thin it hid behind clouds. My GPS glowed orange, marking the call site. An intersection where a single stop sign faced an overgrown field to the north and a 2-lane road to the south. I parked under the stop sign and crouched behind the cruiser's fender. Maglite in one hand, service revolver in the other. I radioed my position. On scene, no visible houses within a half-mile radius. No response. I stepped onto the road where tire ruts cut into packed earth. There was a single Polaroid taped to the stop sign, face up, showing me walking away from the cruiser at the fairgrounds. That figure stood behind me in the photo, shoulder leaning into frame, gaze fixed on my back. I spun around in the black field. Nothing. I pocketed the photo and walked back to my cruiser, every hair on my arms standing at attention. That night, I stayed in the car until dawn, hoping maybe someone would call for backup, or dispatch would come back online. But day broke with a pale gray sky and silence, and I drove back empty-handed. So here I am, an accident in slow motion. Started with routine checks, ended up traced by a phantom who knows my every move. I don't know where this ends. I don't know if I'll find him before he decides this is fun enough to keep going. All I know is that on those dark roads, under those dead radio frequencies, I'm the one being hunted. And every shift, every mile, every Polaroid reminds me how alone I really am. The sun was barely up when I finally crawled into bed, uniform still half on, boots muddy beside me. I slept sitting up, leaning against the headboard, light snoring from exhaustion. When I woke, the kitchen clock read 7:12 a.m. Too early to be functional, but too late to chase ghosts. Coffee was lukewarm by the time I staggered into the station, and dispatch still hadn't caught up. No calls marked answered, no logs of any backup ever registering. I wondered if I'd phoned a ghost. That morning, I found another Polaroid taped to my locker door, half hidden behind a night shift rules memo. I peeled off the memo, a snapshot of me, framed from the waist up, staring dead into the camera with a tired scowl. Behind me, in the corner, was a dark figure in a hoodie, barely bigger than a shadow. No face. Every time I looked at that photo, my heart pounded. Not with fear of violence, but with fear of being watched. I tore it down and dropped it into the trash. Didn't touch the rule sheet, though. I pinned it back up. I took the cruiser out for a routine inspection. Engine idled rough, oil light flickering. The passenger seat was damp under my hand, rain residue from when I let the stranger out on Maple Avenue. I opened the glove box, a single pack of cigarettes I didn't smoke, and in my pocket, the last Polaroid from County Road 12. I stared at it until the fuel gauge dipped. At 6:45 p.m. that night, I decided to patrol outside normal routes. Back roads, dirt lanes, anything that felt empty enough to offer clues. I'd been following footprints, mismatched photos, and silence like a bloodhound after scent. By 9:13 p.m., I was on Old Mill Road, the tree cover so thick the headlights barely pierced the gloom. I flipped on the cruiser's spot lamp and flicked off the low beams, trying to see the widest angle through drifting fog. Every so often, a deer would bolt across the road, eyes glowing like headlights of their own. No humans, no houses, no cell reception. Just the chokehold of night wrapping me tighter than any handcuffs. Then the radio crackled faintly, like it had picked up on a different frequency. My call sign came through, warped and drawn out. 1034, as if someone was calling it by dragging each digit out like a warning. I tapped the mic. "Dispatch, this is 1034. Come in." Static, so thick I couldn't hear my own voice echo back. I shut the engine off. The cruiser died, the tape loop of radio static snuffing out any other sound. I heard my own breathing. And then, footsteps, soft but deliberate, shuffling around the driver's door. I clicked my flashlight over the hood. Nothing. No headlamp glow in the distance, no silhouette against the fog. I eased out of the cruiser, hand on my revolver, and circled it clockwise. My boots crunched on gravel and fallen leaves. I stopped at the driver's door. The window was down 2 inches, unlocked. I flicked the light inside and saw the dashboard, the cluster of photos I'd been carrying, all laid out on the dash in a fan, soaked through. Each one showed me in a different location. The Mercer farmhouse, the church lot, the hardware store, the fairgrounds, the county road sign. Every scene I'd investigated. Every moment I'd felt unsafe. But they were different now. In each photo, the dark figure was closer to me, lurking just behind my shoulder, always outside my field of vision. I stuffed the wet photos in my jacket pocket, slammed the door, and sprinted back to the cruiser. My lungs burned, chest heaving, adrenaline twisting my insides like barbed wire. I threw myself behind the wheel and slammed the door shut. I fumbled the key, jammed it into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I shoved the spot lamp into the dash and peeled out, tires kicking up gravel, and tore back onto the main road. By 10:02 p.m., I'd flagged down a passing sheriff's truck near the junction of Old Mill and Pine Creek. I leapt out, thrust the soaked photos at the deputy inside. "Someone's been in my cruiser. They know my shift patterns. They're watching me. They've got pictures from tonight, everywhere I've been." The deputy blinked at the Polaroids. "Jesus, these are fresh. You need help?" I told him no. It wasn't my problem anymore. My problem was finding who they were and what they wanted. The deputy drove off with the cruiser behind me, lights on, leaving me alone under a broken streetlight that sputtered in the wind. I didn't sleep that night, nor the next. Days blurred into examinations of every corner of the station. I tore apart my home looking for hidden cameras, but found only dust and spare socks. I revisited every site, retraced every patrol, measured footprints in mud, tested door locks, profiled every person who'd ever called dispatch for me. Everything came up cold. It was like chasing a ghost whose footprints faded the moment you saw them. On the 12th night, 2 nights ago, I got the call, that final piece I didn't know I needed, a 911 hang-up from inside my own house. Dispatch said it came from my landline. I recognized the ringtone, my daughter's favorite tone. I pulled up outside my house with lights blazing. Inside, the front door was unlocked. That glove from Mercer lay on the welcome mat. The basement light was on. I could hear the hum of the fridge and the click of my wife's jewelry box sliding open downstairs. I climbed the creaking steps 2 at a time, breath loud, hand on the holster. At the top, the hallway stretched empty. Then I saw it. My daughter's teddy bear, soaked, lying face down in a pool of water at the foot of the stairs. The basement door stood ajar. I called her name, no answer. I wrenched the door open and peered down. The stairs were dark, the only light spilling upward onto a single photograph taped to the wall. It was of me, asleep in bed, head tipped back on the pillow, mouth open like I wasn't supposed to breathe. In the corner of that photo, barely visible, the dark figure crouched beside me, camera in hand. My hand slammed against the wall. My heart thundered so hard I could hear it echo through the floorboards. I climbed down the first step. The photo fluttered in the damp draft. Another click sounded. Camera shutter. I spun, pressed the mag light into the darkness, and saw nothing but the twisted metal of the water heater and the coil of an old extension cord. I reached the bottom step, saw a Polaroid on the concrete floor, freshly developed, hotter than anything I'd held before. I picked it up with a trembling hand. It was of my daughter, standing in the corner behind me, eyes wide, clutching her teddy. She looked right at the camera, backlit by her nightlight somewhere in her room upstairs. I turned, cell phone in hand, dialed 911 despite knowing they'd never answer. No dial tone. The hum of the fridge shut off. Silence spread in the low basement, and I realized the only thing separating me from that darkness was a single wooden door I'd left wide open. I dropped the photo. It fluttered like a dying bird. And then the basement door clicked shut behind me, slowly, deliberately, while I still held my phone. I pressed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. My voice shook as I whispered into the pitch black, "Who's there?" "What do you want?" No answer. Only my own ragged breathing and the faintest click of a camera shutter right behind me, capturing the moment I knew I wasn't alone and might never be free of what was hunting me. I slammed my shoulder into the basement door again and again, the wood groaning like an old man in pain. The lock didn't budge. Behind me, the shutter of a distant camera clicked at regular intervals, capturing each desperate motion I made. My breath came in ragged gasps that echoed against the concrete walls, bouncing back to me as hollow mimicry. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the water heater, listening for footsteps, a whispered voice, anything. All I heard was the hum of electrical wires and the drip of water from a leaky pipe. Somewhere up above, my phone buzzed silently against the wooden stairs. No signal, no dispatch, no backup, just buzzing in the dark. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to calm myself, running through every training scenario I'd ever drilled. Call for help, find an exit, secure a safe corner. But none of it applied. There was no help coming, no exit until I forced the door, and no safe corner in a space built for storage and utilities. I shook my head, trying to clear the static of panic, and focused on the problem. I needed to open that door. I kicked at the lower hinge. Metal screeched, but the hinge held. Then I jammed my baton under the crack and twisted. Wood splintered, paint peeled, but the lock still held firm. In the growing pitch of my frustration, I heard it again, the click of a shutter, softer this time, almost reverent. Like whoever was back there was studying me, savoring each moment of terror. My eyes stung as I realized they didn't want me to see them. They wanted me to feel watched, helpless, tangled in my own mind. That was their power. I turned, swept the beam of my maglite across the basement. Empty shelves, cobwebs, boxes of old holiday decorations blanketed in dust. Nothing moved, no sign of a person, no hidden camera, no exit besides that door. But I knew I wasn't alone. I backed away to the center of the floor, chest heaving, and retrieved the last Polaroid from my jacket pocket, the one showing my daughter framed in her bedroom behind me. Even looking at it made my stomach churn, but I needed clarity. I clicked on the flashlight over the image, reading her face, eyes wide, lip caught between fear and defiance. That same expression flickered behind my eyelids. Her. She was the reason I stayed, my only tether to this world of daylight and half-forgotten laughter. Whoever this was, whoever was stalking me, had taken that tether and dangled it as a threat. I folded the photo and stuffed it back in my pocket. Nothing else would lure me into a trap. I crouched and examined the door from the floor up, running a hand along the bottom edge. Something scratched at my fingers. Tiny splinters and a faint imprint in the wood, like a thumbprint or a pressure mark. I followed it to the lock and felt something sticky. Dried blood, dark and tacky. The same dark red that stained the letters at the fairgrounds. The red that dripped down the concession stand side in fresh rain. I touched it and recoiled, tasting metal and fear in my mouth. Whoever had done this wasn't just playing games. They'd marked their territory in my space, my home, my sanctuary. Now they were inside my walls. I stood and strapped my revolver to my hip. I might not be able to break the door open, but I could blast through the lock if I had to. I wiped a bead of sweat from my brow and settled into a firing stance. Feet shoulder width, revolver aimed at the lock cylinder. I inhaled, held my breath, then squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked the air, ringing off the concrete so loud it made my eardrums bleed. Wood splintered around the strike, fragments raining to the floor. I pressed again, a second round, and the lock casing collapsed inward with a splintering groan. I yanked the door open, and the maglite swept over the threshold, illuminating a figure halfway down the stairs. Dark hoodie, shoulders hunched, breathing steady. I pulled back, startled by how calm they looked. They didn't raise their hands. They only cocked their head, as though curious about the gun barrel trained on them. My finger trembled on the trigger. I switched off the safety without thinking and demanded, voice raw, "Who the hell are you? What the hell do you want?" They took a slow step backward up the stairs, pulling their hood back to reveal nothing but a nondescript face, features blurred by shadow and distance. Then they lifted a hand and flicked a small camera toward me. The built-in flash popped on, briefly lighting the basement in harsh white rectangles. The figure snapped the shutter twice, then pressed the camera to their chest and folded their arms. Their eyes glinted in the flash. Nothing human in them, just reflections of my own fear. I blinked, and they were gone. I swung the light up the stairs. The staircase was empty, the top landing dark. The camera shutter clicked again, behind me, and I spun to find them standing at the base of the opposite wall, an impossible distance away in an instant. No sound of footsteps, only the persistent click. I trained my light on them, just a shape, half blurred by rainwater dripping from the ceiling pipe overhead. I switched the mag light to my offhand and used my right fist to smash the camera they'd dropped. Plastic cracked, lens shattered, shutter stuck open. I kicked it into the corner. The clicks stopped. The only noise was the drip of water from a broken joint in the pipes. Above, my chest heaved, revolver arm shaking so badly I could barely holster the weapon. I thought about my daughter upstairs, alone, waiting for her father to come home and tuck her in. The thought kept me from pulling the trigger. Instead, I shuffled to the stairs and peered upward. My flashlight beam trembled, landing on the bottom step where I saw footprints. Wet boot treads leading up, then curving off into the darkness of the hallway. Whoever this was didn't leave the basement to reach the hall. They teleported. Or perhaps the basement was merely the anchor point, and the rest of the house was equally infested. My training told me that makeshift tunnels existed in homes of this age, old cellar extensions, forgotten crawl spaces. But that thief of souls could slip through any gap, any silence, any dark corner I abandoned in my mind. I climbed 2 steps and froze at the first sign of movement. The unlabeled envelope from the church car, now perched on the windowsill of the stair landing. I recognized its creamy texture, the faint scent of cedar. Whoever had been here had gone through my walls, rifled my home, fenced by my own night shifts, and left that envelope as a reminder I was not safe anywhere. I snatched it and smashed the wax seal. Inside was a single photograph. The camera flash illuminated me at the bottom of the basement stairs, pointed at me as I fumbled with the lock hack. In the corner, barely visible, my daughter stood at the top of the basement stairs, peering down at me through the crack in the door I hadn't fully closed. Her small face, pale in the glow, looked surprised, frightened, and in that split second of exposure, complicit in the trap. I gasped, stumbled backward, and the envelope slipped from my hand. The photo fluttered to the wood floor, and the basement filled with that unmistakable click. I looked up, heart pounding, and saw my daughter's teddy bear sitting on the top step, rain-damp fur matted, like it had been placed there deliberately to lure me. My mind blurred. Was she toys and photographs part of their performance or real? I reached out to pick up the bear, and the world around me seemed to tilt as another photo drifted down from above, landing at my feet. I bent to grab it, me, asleep in my uniform, head lolled back as if dead, eyes closed. In the corner of that frame, the stalker's hooded figure knelt beside my bed, hand extended toward my chest, as though cradling my heart. I stared at the final Polaroid, the one that promised everything. Behind me, the basement door clicked itself shut. I was down here with no exit and no signal, clutching evidence that whoever haunted me could be anywhere, or inside me. I sank to my knees, teddy bear limp in my lap, photos scattered like shards of glass. Then, in the dim light, I heard my daughter's voice, muffled but clear. "Daddy? Is it over?" My blood ran cold. Not because she was here, that I could handle, but because she believed it might be over, and I wasn't about to lie to her. I whispered back, voice cracking, "I don't know, sweetheart, I really don't know." And in the echo of that admission, the camera clicked one last time, flashing the basement into stark white, exposing my hollow gaze and the endless questions in my eyes. Then I heard the slow, deliberate steps receding toward the rallying point of darkness, leaving me kneeling on cold concrete, lost in the silence they'd orchestrated. The echo of their footsteps died away, and all that remained was my breath and the faint drip of water, marking time in the stillness of a house no longer mine, hunted by a presence I could neither catch nor escape. That night, the hum of electricity felt different, thicker, as if the walls themselves were charged with something watching. I stayed in the station until my shift ended, pacing the empty halls under flickering fluorescence. Every time those lights buzzed or dipped, my neck prickled. I told myself I was safe inside, among uniforms and radios and locked doors, but deep down, I knew the truth. There were no safe spaces left. When I finally went home, it was just before dawn. The sky hung heavy and gray, like the world hesitated to wake. I unlocked the door with a trembling hand and stepped inside, boots silent on the tile foyer. Everything looked normal. My wife's coffee mug by the sink, my daughter's drawings tacked to the refrigerator, the floor mat still crumpled by the front door. I exhaled hard, relief flushing me for a moment, until I saw it. Across the hallway on my daughter's bedroom door, in thick black marker, the same letters that had dripped on the fairgrounds concession stand, spelled out clearly and deliberately, Hunter. My breath caught. The marker used was the same dried ink I dusted from the basement lock. I approached slowly, eyes fixed on that word like it might twist into something else. I reached out and touched the letters, smudged, sticky, still drying. A warning, or a promise, steadied myself against the door jamb. Inside, my daughter's nightlight was on, casting a soft circle of warm glow. I stepped into her room, heart hammering so loud I thought she might hear it and come awake. I flicked off the hall light and surveyed the scene. Her bed, neatly made, teddy bear tucked under her arm, bookshelf lined with bedtime stories. Everything pristine, exactly how I left it weeks ago, before the nightmares began. I knelt by the bed and saw another Polaroid taped to the headboard, one I hadn't seen before. It showed me, shoulders slumped, staring at that Hunter graffiti taken from behind me. And in the corner, eyes shining with fear, was my daughter peeking around the doorframe, hiding, but watching. I turned abruptly, searching the shadows of her room, convinced someone must be there. There was no one. The only sound was the soft hum of the nightlight and my own ragged breathing. I picked up the photo and folded it, slipping it into my uniform pocket, then gathered my daughter into my arms. She mumbled something about monsters. I hugged her tight and whispered nonsense, stories of brave knights and gentle giants. I promised her I'd always protect her, and for a moment, in her sleepy weight against me, I believed it. That night, I installed new locks and extra chains on every door and window. I checked the basement from the outside, sealed the crawlspace vents, and pushed furniture against every secondary exit. My hands moved mechanically, the way you'd board up a house in a flood, but no amount of wood or metal would keep this intruder out. By 11 p.m., I sat in my daughter's rocking chair, watching her drift to sleep under a sky of glow-in-the-dark stars. When she finally exhaled soft and even, I stood and backed out of the room, closing the door so quietly I wasn't sure it latched. I walked through the silent house, checking corners, shining my mag light into every darkened room. Nothing moved. No footprints, no envelopes, no new photographs. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe I had at least one sanctuary. I returned to the foyer and flipped the hall light on. That's when I saw it, scrawled on the floor mat in the same black marker, fresh and bold, "You're next." My skin went cold. The mat lay flat as ever, edges taped down, no sign of disturbance. Yet those words burned into my vision. I knelt and pressed my fingertip onto the ink, damp. Someone had been in my house after I thought it secured, stepping over my daughter's sleeping form. Someone had left that message under my feet. I backed away, light shaking, and turned toward the living room. There, on the coffee table, sat a single Polaroid face-up. My daughter asleep, teddy bear clutched tight, starlight glow cast across her cheek. She'd slept through it all. But in the bottom corner of that photo, blurred but unmistakable, was my own faint reflection in the glass. Eyes wild with panic, hand raised to shield my face, as if I'd just seen something that couldn't exist. I dropped to my knees, chest heaving. I stared at that photo until my vision blurred. Outside the front window, I thought I saw a dark shape slip away into the night, an outline of a hoodie, or perhaps just a trick of my mind. I flicked off the lamp and sat in darkness, pounding heart and trembling hands. I am a police officer trained to hunt criminals, to stand firm in the face of fear, but this is nothing I ever imagined. A predator who lives in my shadows, a hunter who knows the terrain better than I do, slipping in and out of my life like a ghost. I thought I could catch him. I thought I could protect my own home. Instead, I'm the one being hunted, my family used as bait, my sanity slipping between the cracks. I leaned back against the doorframe, listening to the slow rhythm of my daughter's breathing down the hall. And I realize the worst part isn't the unknown face lurking in the dark. It's knowing how easily the uniform I wear can't guard against this. Because in this town, in this house, in the quiet dead of night, there's nowhere left to hide. No door you can lock, no lock you can break, no bullet I can fire to end it. I slide the photo into my pocket and whispered to the empty room, "I'll find you." Then I reach for my phone, still no signal, and look out the window as the sky lightens with dawn. The hunt continues, and I have no choice but to follow every whisper, every shadow, every click of a shutter, until I catch a breath of this thing that's stalking me. Because if I fail, there's no telling what or who will be left.